All right, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes, good morning. Wonderful. Welcome, everybody, to the Union of Restorative Justice, Healthcare, and Street Outreach, a healing approach to preventing gun violence. You all get A's because, and we're in the law school, right? So it's a graded thing here today. But you all get A's for being here at 8:30. I know we're starting a little earlier than we usually start some of our conferences. But we have a lot that we want to get to today, right? A lot of really amazing speakers, panel discussions. And so you will see people trickling in, some high school students, Marquette undergrad students, UWM students. So there's going to be a lot of motion going on, mostly over there. So hopefully we won't be too distracted by that. My name is Mary Triggiano, and I am the director of the Andrew Center for Restorative Justice here at Marquette University Law School. It's really wonderful to see some familiar faces and some new faces as well. So for those who are new here to the Lubar Center's beautiful room, welcome, and welcome to the law school. First, I want to introduce Becca Donaldson. She's over there in the corner. Wave your hands. She joined the Andrew Center for Restorative Justice in August as the assistant director. She's also an assistant clinical professor of law. She teaches here at the law school, but she's also part of our team and helping us grow the Andrew Center for Restorative Justice and do some amazing things, like hosting these wonderful conferences on topics that are near to our hearts in Milwaukee County. We want to, or I want to extend our can't talk today. There's my coffee is over there. My deepest gratitude, that's hard to get out, to all who contributed to the organization of this conference. Some of you are here today, including Justice Janine Geske, Sue Andrew, friends of the Andrew Center for Restorative Justice. Dr. Connie Kostelac, who you will be hearing from today this morning, was helpful and instrumental in pulling this together. We have some young adult circle keepers who have graduated from high school that were helping us create this conference. Of course, Dr. Heather Sattler, who worked with those young adults to help them learn about restorative justice and practice it in their communities. I'm thanking our guest speakers here today, too, our IT personnel, our event and facilities team, and of course, and I don't think she's in here, but she made me start right away, Christine Wyszynski-Vogel, who everyone knows, or most of you know, who's been instrumental in everything we do here at Marquette Law School, especially the Andrew Center, very instrumental. So thank you all. I encourage you to fully read the Marquette University Land and Water Acknowledgement. We purposely put it in the agenda brochure. For the Andrew Center, making this acknowledgement is essential to our mission of healing and reconciliation. Restorative justice calls for honoring truth, fostering accountability, and building right relationships, not just between people, but with the land and its history. It is important to recognize that restorative justice itself is an ancient indigenous practice rooted in the wisdom and traditions of indigenous peoples who have long used community-based restorative approaches to healing and conflict resolution. By recognizing the indigenous nations who have stewarded this region, we affirm our commitment to justice that acknowledges historical harms and seeks to restore relationships rooted in respect, dignity, and responsibility to each other and the earth. Our work at the Andrew Center for Restorative Justice is also built on the foundation laid 20 years ago or so by retired Justice Janine Geske, who's here with us today. She established the Restorative Justice Initiative at Marquette Law School. Her vision of justice as a process of healing, accountability, and transformation continues to inspire the work we do each and every day here at the Andrew Center. Thank you also to the incredible generosity of Louis Andrew, a Marquette Law School graduate, and his wife, Sue Andrew, a Marquette undergraduate in speech. She's here with us today as well. Thanks to them, the initiative became a permanently endowed center in 2021, allowing us to tackle critical issues in our community like gun violence, like trauma, and family violence, those that deeply affect our community. So at its core, restorative justice is about addressing harm by bringing people together, often in restorative justice circles, where dialogue, listening, and empathy are fostered. This ancient indigenous practice, adapted to modern systems of justice, helps build relationships, restore trust, and prevent future harms. Today, we'll be focusing on the profound impact of gun violence in Milwaukee County from the lens of restoration, hope, and healing. Gun violence in public spaces, streets, parks, front porches, our schools, affects entire communities, extending trauma far beyond those directly injured. Witnesses, neighbors, and even acquaintances experience lasting mental and physical health impacts, creating a ripple effect that weakens the community's well-being. In cities like Milwaukee, community gun violence is often concentrated in poor, segregated neighborhoods that have suffered from a legacy of systemic racism and disinvestment in our communities. Black Americans in particular bear the brunt of this, facing gun homicide rates much higher than their white counterparts. At the core of this violence are individuals trapped in cycles of trauma, retaliation, and disconnection from their communities. Hospital-based and community violence intervention programs have made significant strides in breaking these cycles by employing violence interrupters and credible messengers to de-escalate conflicts before they turn deadly. Combining these efforts with restorative justice practices focused on healing, accountability, and repairing harm offers a powerful, holistic solution. Over the past decade, there have been extraordinary gains linking restorative justice and community violence intervention work, and the connection between these two fields is growing. Combining restorative justice practices with community violence prevention efforts can create lasting change by offering those impacted by violence a voice and an opportunity for healing. Together, these approaches can address both the immediate violence and the deeper systemic issues, fostering resilience and healing within communities. This morning, we're going to begin with a 30-minute clip from Mending Our Wounds, a restorative circle for gun violence healing and prevention. This film captures the voices of survivors, healers, first responders, and violence interrupters, individuals on the front lines of breaking the cycles of gun violence. For those of you here who saw the film last night at our reception, I think revisiting a portion of it today is essential to grounding the conversations we'll have throughout the day. So you get to see a rerun, but I think it's important for that to happen. Please be mindful that some of the stories in the film may be upsetting as they depict real experiences of gun violence. Take care of yourselves during the viewing and feel free to step outside if needed. If you need to step outside, we do have a quiet space in room 185 near the lobby. We also have a special guest in that room this morning during the film, a furry friend and therapy dog named Blue from the local nonprofit Pets Helping People. Do not all run out and go see Blue. If you want your A, you stay in here. After the film, as you can see from the agenda, we have a full day of engaging and insightful speakers who will help us explore the intersection of restorative justice, healthcare, and street outreach in addressing gun violence. I want to again thank you all for being here today and for your commitment to engaging in the hard but necessary work of preventing gun violence and building healthier, more hopeful communities. I hope today's discussion inspires each of you to take action in your own circles of influence. Get that, circles? You'll remember that. All right, let's get started with the film. Thanks, Ryan. So for those of you who saw the film last night, you know there's a part 2 where we move into hope. And what these individuals here in the circle feel is that answer to the potential for gun violence and gun violence prevention. If you weren't here yesterday, you want to see the rest of the film, we will hopefully have it on our website, the Andrews Center for Restorative Justice, so you can take a look at it and watch the rest of it, because it is pretty powerful, part 2 of that. So I hope you take with you today the stories shared by each of these individuals, which brought into focus both the deep scars left by gun violence and the hope that comes from healing together. Their courage reminds us that even in the face of immense pain, there is always the potential for healing, restoration, and change. Hope arises when communities like us come together, listen, and act with compassion. So as we move now into today's full part of our conference, let us carry forward the insights and the emotions stirred by the film, using them to fuel our efforts to build safer and more resilient communities. So I'm very, very pleased to introduce our first speaker. She's a dear friend, Dr. Kostelac. Connie is a highly accomplished researcher and leader in the fields of criminology, psychology, and law studies. She earned her undergraduate degree in these areas at Marquette University, where she developed a deep interest in the sociological and psychological dimensions of crime. This passion led her to pursue advanced studies, earning a master's in science in criminology from Florida State University and an interdisciplinary PhD in justice studies from Arizona State University. Currently, she is an assistant professor, Division of Epidemiology and Social Sciences, the Institute for Health and Equity, and the director of the Division of Data Analytics at the Comprehensive Injury Center at the Medical College of Wisconsin. In her role, she uses data to offer critical insights into both the justice system and broader societal issues to inform local, state, and federal policy. Her presentation today focuses on the use of gun violence data to inform policy, guide prevention work, and increase public health and safety. Let's have a warm welcome for Dr. Kostelac.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome, and just everyone can hear me okay? All right, well, good morning, everyone. Really appreciate the opportunity to be with you this morning. I'm gonna set a timer so I can keep myself on track and hopefully leave some time for questions, but I'll be here all day, so also happy to have some conversations on breaks and during lunch. Part of my goal for today is really to try to set the stage for a lot of the conversation that's gonna happen throughout the rest of the day. And part of this is just why is it so important that we're here talking about gun violence, right? We know that it's a challenging issue, but really taking a step back to say what's happening nationally, what's happening locally, and why is this an issue that we should all really be more engaged with at multiple levels. It's hard sometimes, I think, when it doesn't impact people individually to recognize how much of an issue this is for individuals, families, and communities, and Milwaukee, as former Chief Judge Triggiano has said, is no exception. So some of you may have seen that relatively recently the U.S. Surgeon General actually came out with a proclamation of firearm violence as a public health crisis. That's a huge step, right, to have that recognized at a national level. Part of that is tied to what we're seeing in terms of changing trends. If you look at the chart that's up here right now, you can see that one of the things that's been changing is the impact that firearms are having, particularly on young people. So when we look at children and adolescents across the country, firearms have been increasing in terms of being a primary cause of losing lives for young people. So firearms as of 2022 for the, it started a little bit sooner than that, but we now see that over the last number of years, for ages 1 to 19 in the US, firearms are the leading cause of death. That should give us all pause right there, right? So let's talk about that at a state level. When we look across Wisconsin, the same holds true. Firearms were the leading cause of death for ages 1 to 19 between 2020 and 2022 in the state of Wisconsin as well. When we look at that by what was the cause of death, we do see that the majority of those are assault or homicide related, about 66% during that time period. The next biggest group is unfortunately individuals where it's self-inflicted, so when we have individuals that die by suicide. and a small portion are ones that are unintentional. When we look at that more specifically, so firearms are one thing, but that essentially means that homicides are the second leading cause of death in Wisconsin for ages 1 to 19. That also holds true. When we're talking about Milwaukee County, it's the number one cause of death for young people ages 1 to 19 over that time period. It was the leading cause of death at the state level for individuals who are Black or African American, also true in Milwaukee County. And across the state, the homicide rate is 25 times higher for individuals who are Black or African American compared to those who are white. In Milwaukee County, the rate was about 3 for individuals who are white, about almost 45 for individuals who are Black or African American per 100,000. Let that sink in for a minute, right? In terms of thinking about the impact that this is having on our communities. And one of the things that we need to reckon with is that when we look at homicides in particular, the majority of them involve a firearm, and that's been increasing in recent years as well. So violence overall, but gun violence in particular, I would agree with the Surgeon General, it is a public health crisis, right? It's something we should all be thinking about. So just to give us a little bit more of a local picture, this is within the city of Milwaukee. So we do see that the majority of the both homicides and non-fatal shootings that occur in the county are centered in the city of Milwaukee. We did have a dramatic increase when we look at essentially pre-COVID, getting into the COVID time period. The total number of individuals who were directly affected by homicides or non-fatal shootings was up almost 100% in 2022 compared to 2019. When we look at more recent information, 2023 was the first year since the start of the COVID pandemic that we've seen a bit of a decrease, which is good news, and we'll talk about a little bit more promising news in just a little while. But 2023 was the first time in multiple years that we saw a slight decrease, but still not down to pre-pandemic levels, so still up about 83% over 2019. Now, I wish that we always could just talk about this and get everyone's altruistic, we care about lives, we care about individuals. I wish that was always at the forefront. Sometimes it's not, right? But sometimes we can also reach people by talking about the economic impact that this has. So this is a relatively recent publication from the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform, which is often called NIC Jr. It's one of the agencies that's actually working with Milwaukee on an initiative called the CAPS Initiative, which is now funding some local community organizations within Milwaukee that are doing community violence and gun violence related work. But one of the things that they've done in multiple jurisdictions, including in Milwaukee now, is they've actually taken a look at various aspects of what goes into the cost of a shooting or a homicide. So you can see the categories up here. We obviously don't have time to go into a lot of detail on this, but you can look it up. It's online. So looking at things like crime scene response, the hospital end of what is impacted from a cost standpoint, the criminal justice impact, the lost tax revenue, victim support. They put all of these categories together, and you can see the bottom line. When we're talking about a non-fatal shooting, per person that is impacted, almost $650,000. For a homicide, they estimate over $2 million per incident. Every one of those that we can prevent, we should be thinking about how that can go back into prevention efforts around gun violence. Those are big numbers, and that's probably still not the full picture of all of the impacts, right? These are fairly direct costs that they can estimate across these different categories. So fundamentally, I don't want us, as we're talking today, we deal a lot with data. It is never lost on us that every time we're talking about a number, we're talking about a person. We're talking about a person and their family and those in their social network and even the broader community who are impacted every time we have a shooting, every time we have a homicide. These are people's lives that we are talking about. That's not lost on me. I just want to make sure before we go through the rest of the data that that's not lost on any of you either. So this is a slide from the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. We'd just like to highlight that part of this is it's the direct impact, and some of this you're going to hear from the panel members today. It's the direct impact, right, of the injury itself, but it also has other tangential impacts on people's lives and experiences. So it affects everything from how people's overall health ends up progressing during their lives, to their mental health, to other aspects of their family life. So just wanted to give you a picture of some of the ways that we need to think about the broader impact of violence and gun violence in particular. So let's take a little look. We're going to start at the state level and come in a little bit to what's happening locally. So just to give you a sense, the darker the color, the higher the rate. This is essentially the rate of firearm homicides relative to the population across the state. You can see that we've got two relatively low population counties that have high rates, probably because they have low population and just a few number of incidents. But the other one that's on the dark end of the scale is Milwaukee County. When we look at the percent of homicides with a firearm, and you're going to see a comparison of this in just a minute, the pattern looks a little bit different. We do have some other counties kind of around the edge of the state, actually, that have a relatively high percent of the homicides that involve a firearm. But the proportion is high within Milwaukee County. And if we look at this from a comparative standpoint, so the gray line is the state, the green line is Milwaukee County, and the blue line is the city of Milwaukee. So what I want you to notice is that it's been increasing in multiple years in terms of the proportion of homicides that involve a firearm. We are upwards the last few years of 90% or higher in the county and the city. And that if you look at 2022, which was the high year that I showed you a few minutes ago in terms of the number of incidents that we were dealing with, nationally, we're at over 90%, 93, 94 in the county and the city. Nationally, 77%. So we are high. So regardless of, we have to take to some extent the discussion to firearms are here, how do we make it less likely that firearms are going to be used in shootings, lead to people's injuries or death? When the majority of our homicides involve a firearm, it's hard to say that firearms are not part of what we're trying to address. Just to give you a quick comparison, the colors look very different because obviously the volume of incidents of aggravated assault are much higher than we have for homicides across the state. But you'll see that Milwaukee is again on the top end of the scale in terms of the firearm aggravated assault rate, which would include shootings as well as incidents where a firearm was shown but not actually fired at someone. So we have a high overall ag assault rate. There are some other counties that are up there as well in terms of the firearm aggravated assault rate in the state, but we are on the high end. And then similar to what we saw before, we're not completely on the high end with the ag assaults with a firearm when we look across the other counties across the state, but very similar pattern to what I just showed you, right? We are higher than the state. We've been increasing. We're at over 60% in 2022 and close to 60% in 2023 of all the ag assaults involving a firearm, where nationally in 2022 it was 30%. So, I want to just give you a little bit of additional detail about some things to know about gun violence in Milwaukee. So, this should come as no surprise, and actually, former Chief Judge, it's so hard to know, Director Triggiano mentioned earlier that gun violence is geographically concentrated, right? We're going to talk in a few minutes about the Violence Response Public Health and Safety Team, or what we call VR-FAST. The outline that you see on these maps is the focus area that we use for VR-FAST because it is where the highest concentration of homicides and non-fatal shootings occur within the city and the county. You can see that we have a high concentration within that area. Just to give you a sense of what that means, in 2023, about 37% of the homicides and non-fatal shootings occurred within that area. It's about 10% of the population and about 8% of the land area of the city of Milwaukee. So it's very disproportionate to where we have people and where we have the geographic size of the area. Now, this gives you a sense of some of the particular neighborhoods that, at least in 2023, had higher concentrations. And then you also have the firearm-related ag assaults here, which shows a very similar pattern in terms of where we see that concentration occurring. When we look at who is impacted, as was mentioned during our opening, we do have a disproportionate impact on young Black men, which you also saw in what I showed you at the beginning. But when we look at individuals who are experiencing victimization, they're about 80% male, a little over that for those that are suspected of engaging in violence. When we look at it by race, it's about 84 and 88% in 2023. And then when we look at it by age group, I think there's often a narrative that it's really young people that are causing issues. We really have the concentration under the age of 35. So we're looking at about 72% of individuals who experience victimization, about 77% of those who are suspected of engaging in violence being age 34 and younger. And we do have some concentration when we look at it in a more detailed way. We do have some concentration in the older teenage years and the young adult, right? That's where we see concentration within the city. When we look at, this is just showing you that this holds true across what we're seeing more recently. About 91% of the homicides in 2023 involved a firearm. Most of those are handguns. We are seeing a lot of 9mm, 40 calibers, but mostly handguns are involved in these incidents. When we look at the factors involved in these incidents, often they're unknown, right? Particularly if there's not either someone identified as having engaged in the incident, we don't always know who is involved, but also sometimes there's hesitancy about cooperation, and that can occur for a variety of reasons in terms of understanding what those incidents are related to. But of the ones where we have an indication, the highest proportion are arguments and fights. They are situations that are escalating, and we can see this in examples that we see in the media of what is happening in particular situations. That's followed next by situations involving a robbery where someone may be trying to take property from someone that ends up escalating in the situation. And then we, of course, have domestic violence and intimate partner violence as another high area when we're looking at what's behind the homicides and non-fatal shootings. It is important to know, and this is something that we've seen increasing in the last few years, that we tend to have a higher proportion of the incidents that are domestic violence or intimate partner violence happening in residences. The ones that are not, the ones that are more community violence related, actually tend to occur outside, in vehicles, on the street, sometimes in alleys, it's in people's yards. So a lot of these incidents are not, even if people are acquainted with each other, they're not occurring inside people's homes, they're occurring outside. And in about 12% of the incidents, we have more than one person in the same incident who's experiencing victimization, either being shot or losing their life. So just a couple other things that we should be considering. Part of what you're going to hear about multiple times today is thinking about how we're looking at gun violence from a public health perspective, which I think pairs really, really well with thinking about it from restorative justice lens, right? This is about thinking about prevention. It's also thinking about healing. It's thinking about the various points along the continuum where we're trying to intervene and redirect what's happening. Really thinking about how these two fit together, I think, is part of our discussion today, but knowing that taking that public health perspective is an important part of how we're thinking about this topic. We also want to be careful. I'm always so hesitant. The maps I showed you earlier, it's important that we put resources where the disproportionate impact is happening, but we also want to be really careful not to further stigmatize communities. There's a lot of good and a lot of resources and a lot of things that are happening. We can't lose sight of that, but we also need to make sure that we're helping to address and working with the community to understand what the solutions can be. So collaboration, you're going to hear that a lot today, is really key. Knowing that we can take different perspectives into account is also part of, I think, the success we're already seeing and the success that we will see in the future. Even the circle had its own aspect of collaboration, right? You saw some interactions between individuals that were even happening during the course of the circle. But then also making sure that we continue to look at ways to incorporate and elevate the perspective and voices of those that are directly or indirectly impacted. those closest to the issue often are in the best position to help figure out what else we need to do to address the issue. So, I want us to talk about hope, right? Let's talk about some of the things that are happening that you may not be aware of, and that I'm teeing this up a bit for things that you're going to hear about today. But many of the programs and the efforts and the initiatives that are going on in the city and the county are up on the screen right now. So you have the 414 Life program with the community and hospital-based violence intervention. You have some pieces that are now connected to that within the hospital system with the Trauma Quality of Life Clinic and the post-discharge care team. You have Project Ujima at Children's, which is a parallel to the 414 Life hospital program for children. You've got some programs happening through the Department of Health and Human Services with their Credible Messenger program and Advanced Peace that are new critical programs to reach individuals that may be at risk of gun violence. You have efforts even from a law enforcement perspective in terms of things that are occurring and trying to work more closely with the community. And then you have efforts through areas such as the Office of Community Wellness and Safety, as well as the Cardiff model, which is essentially another way of looking at how we're addressing where incidents are happening and bringing the community together to look at ways that we can try to find solutions. So we're seeing some positive trends in recent months, so I want to make sure that I emphasize we're continuing to see a continuation of what we saw near the end of 2023. So far this year through the 21st of this month, overall homicides are down about 22% and non-fatal shootings are down about 23%. We should note that, right? And then the focus area that I showed you is down even more. That's the area that has that highest concentration. Usually we don't see the same decreases that we're seeing citywide. We're actually seeing more in that particular area. So I want to just mention a couple of related efforts that are underway, and some of these you're going to hear more about today. But one of the things that actually comes up in the second part of the video and is part of, I think, another way of thinking about this from a public health perspective is the Violence Response Public Health and Safety Team, or what we call VR-FAST. Essentially, this was a recognition that if we could stand up a unified emergency operations center for COVID as a public health crisis, we should be able to do the same thing as with gun violence as a public health crisis. So we essentially looked at a variety of different models, took a bunch of pieces from those to start to bring together a multidisciplinary team to work together to try to break down some of those silos, try to get communication happening in a more effective way, and look at how we can try to better coordinate those violence prevention efforts by bringing different entities together. So part of this is supporting Goal 6 of the Blueprint for Peace. How many of you are familiar with the Blueprint for Peace? All right, we need to get more out to all of you, but one of the goals was to strengthen the capacity and coordination of violence prevention efforts, and this is really a core guiding document for some of these efforts within Milwaukee. So this is part of supporting that particular goal for the Blueprint for Peace. These are the overarching goals of the VR-FAST, trying to improve communication and information sharing, trying to identify resources as well as unmet needs, and then looking how we can better coordinate the response to violence. So we just had a meeting yesterday where part of our conversation was around the recent shooting that occurred at the flag football game, and how can we bring partners together to both better understand what happened in that incident, but also think about a critical response protocol in those situations to make sure that everyone is quickly notified of the incident that occurred and that the response is coordinated rather than feeling fragmented. So just an example of the type of work that this group is doing. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but part of what's important to know is that by bringing this multidisciplinary group together, which includes folks from the criminal justice system, it includes folks from public health, from those that are doing the violence intervention efforts on the ground, is that we've had a lot of conversations about the fact that it's really important for us collectively to be thinking about this from that public health perspective, and thinking about the fact that sometimes our responses are going to be after the fact, what we would call tertiary prevention. So even sometimes I think you could say that restorative justice can be tertiary, right? Because it's after an incident occurs, it's a response to try to prevent future occurrences, but also help with healing and return from the incident that happened. But it also can affect things more upstream, right? So thinking about more primary prevention, the way that we can look at how do we get information out to try to prevent the incidents from happening in the first place. So some of that ties back to what I said earlier about it's hard to ignore the role of firearms, right, and what I just showed you. So part of that is how do we get better education around safe storage, around how people should handle firearms that they have to make it less likely that incidents are going to happen where someone is harmed. So this gives you some examples. It's been interesting to evolve some of this in trying to make sure that folks that aren't used to talking about prevention, that we're all talking about the same thing when we mean prevention, and that we can really think about different approaches along the continuum. And part of the reason I'm mentioning this is when you're listening to the different panels today, you're gonna hear things across the different aspects of the prevention continuum. You're gonna hear about programs that are trying to reduce the potential for retaliation after the fact, but you're also gonna hear about efforts to try to work with individuals that may be at risk way before an incident occurs. So keep that in mind as we're going through today. I did also wanna mention, back to the blueprint, that there is a goal specifically, excuse me, around healing and restorative justice. So take a look at the blueprint because that ties very directly, again, into what we're talking about with restorative justice today. You're gonna hear about the 414 Life program directly today. Part of our role is the evaluation of the program. I have actually some of the team members that are involved in the process here with us today. But I just wanted to highlight a few things. So this was the first evaluation that we did through 2022. We're in the middle of the second evaluation right now. So you'll want to watch for those results in the next about 60 days. But when we look at the initial time period of the 414 Life program, just a few things to highlight. In that time period, there were over 1,075 hospital referrals. Those are for individuals who experienced a gunshot wound who came into Froedtert Hospital. That's a large number of people that were serviced by connecting to the 414 Life hospital-based program. There were about 257 mediations within the community where the violence interrupters and the outreach workers were working with individuals or families where there was the potential for continued conflict or retaliation to occur. In about 52% of those, the mediation led to essentially a successful resolution, and in another 19%, there was a conditional resolution. So in other words, in over 70% of the incidents and the communications that were happening, there was a successful resolution based on 414 Life being involved. We also, you may hear a little bit about this today, but we also looked specifically at the school-based curriculum that 414 Life does going into schools within Milwaukee. 93.5%, so almost 94% of the students that participated in those programs felt somewhat better, a little better, or much better prepared to avoid or prevent violence. It had an impact on them. All right, so a couple other things that are coming up. We have some dashboard work happening. Part of our goal is to make, excuse me, apparently I've been talking too much this morning, have more data available and data be more transparent. So we have a dashboard that will be coming out in the next few months that will be available to all of you around homicides and non-fatal shootings. We also have some recent research, and this is a recent publication that came out. How many of you think there's a link between violence, firearm violence, and alcohol? You're right. Some of that is at the personal level, but some of it is also where alcohol outlets are located, and particularly alcohol outlets that are places like liquor stores or gas stations that are selling alcohol to take away. Part of what this research shows is that when we have alcohol outlets and concentration, they tend to be concentrated in relation to firearm violence. That's got policy implications, right? Things that we can think about from a policy standpoint. So we also are going to have a dashboard that actually will show you where the alcohol outlets are located in relation to violence. So that's going to be coming out too as another tool for community organizers, for community members, for policymakers to be thinking about that violence and alcohol connection. And then we had a relatively recent related publication about looking at different aspects, and this is when we look at where the geographic concentration is occurring, that we have an overlap with essentially historical patterns of redlining, historical patterns of disinvestment, as was mentioned earlier. So this particular study showed that 80% of individuals who had a firearm injury lived in disadvantaged neighborhoods. That's probably not on the surface surprising, but the magnitude of that should again give us pause, right? And thinking about the structural issues, the social determinants of health, the other factors that are related to what we're seeing in terms of the outcomes for gun violence. So this also reinforced that socioeconomic status and alcohol outlet density, so where those alcohol outlets are concentrated, is related to firearm injury. And it also shows that this, again, that we need to consider the community context when we're talking about how individuals are both impacted and how they may be recovering from firearm violence. Last thing I just want to mention, and this is hopefully just another opportunity that is now available to address these issues. So Dr. Terry Daroon-Cassini is the director of our Comprehensive Injury Center at the Medical College, and we recently were selected to be an injury control research center with the CDC. What that really means is we're one of 11 this year, one of 11 research institutions across the entire country that are now connected to each other and connected to the CDC in terms of being able to do more and have more connections to research around injury control and prevention. So we have specific projects that are tied to this over the next 5 years, but we also have small grants that we'll be able to give out for different projects. One of the projects is actually one that we're leading, again, on alcohol and violence, but we have other ones that are in related areas of injury as well. So this is another opportunity to think about ways that we can use data and research to try to support ways that we can address injury and violence within Milwaukee. So I know I'm not completely out of time yet, but those were the main things that I was hoping to cover for all of you. Would certainly welcome any questions.
Let's give her a big round of applause. I didn't think she could pull it off. 40 plus slides in under 40 minutes. She did a great job.
I have 5 minutes left even on my timer.
Which means questions. Any questions from the audience? I know it's a lot of information, right? Over here, Becca's bringing you the microphone.
It'll give me a second to hopefully stop whatever is happening with my throat here, too.
I have 2 quick questions, and maybe everybody else knows the answer, but where do you find this blueprint for peace? That's number 1.
So the blueprint for peace you can actually find if you just search it, you'll find it on the city website.
Okay.
And there's a nice kind of scrollable version of it, but there are also printed copies, so you also could make a request to get a printed copy of the actual book.
Great.
There's also potentially in the making Blueprint for Peace Part 2, which is potentially being worked on by a lot of individuals. So,
great. The second question I have is, how do you, or do you at all, relate to any of the organizations within the city that are working on issues around guns, say like our violence, like WAVE or any of the other organizations?
Yeah, so there's actually, through various aspects of this work, lots of connections across those organizations. So we certainly have members of the team that interact with WAVE on a regular basis. We actually recently had the first kind of statewide convening to try to bring people together from across the state around community violence intervention work. And even within VR Fast, we have all of these organizations. So we have government organizations, we have local organizations that are doing work on the ground, we have involvement from some of our state and federal partners, so really a pretty broad set of interactions, but we're also always looking for who might we be missing and what else can we bring in terms of other expertise to the table.
Charlotte?
Good morning. Thank you so much for your presentation. That was very enlightening. As a new policymaker here, elected official here in the city, I see that there's a disconnect with how we make policy, and just the translation of we're very reactive, right? We, almost half of our budget goes toward policing, and it continues, their budget continues to increase every single year. But, other areas such as prevention and, funding programs and just really going back into community doesn't really get highlighted, or some of those funds don't adequately shift. What you shared in regards to the alcohol, right? Like, we license, we have folks come to us all the time. Hey, I want a liquor license, et cetera, et cetera. We get to say yay or nay as council members. How can we use this data to better, I don't know if it's, you need to do some coach-ups with us or, something, but how do we use this data to continue to enact good policies? Because that's what all of this, boils down to for us. How do we enact good policies that are coinciding with a lot of the data that's already been presented?
So I think we are very interested, Terry left the room, very interested collectively in trying to find ways to translate the work into how it impacts policy across the board. And also I think part of the challenge, at least from my perspective, is we need to continue to look at, we keep talking about the CVI ecosystem, and essentially what we mean by that is how is it evolving where we have all of these different efforts, all these different organizations that are doing work. How do we better present a picture of not just what each individual program is doing, but how is that working collectively, and where do we need additional funding or resources, for example? That's something that I think we really need to be thinking and working toward to be able to help paint the picture. But with something really concrete like the alcohol, we're actually right in the middle of trying to look at how do we turn some of these research papers into infographics, into documents that can be useful for policymakers, can be useful for community members, because we recognize, it's one thing to say, here's this paper, go read this 30-page, document. It's another thing to say, how can we actually then make that digestible for people that are super busy, but also in a way that we can use it to impact policy. So one of the things, and I'm going to call Leilani out. So Leilani is on my team at the medical college, and we're literally in the middle of trying to do that with that particular paper, and we want to then be able to disseminate that. We also, at the Comprehensive Injury Center, have the Wisconsin Alcohol Policy Project. So we have some folks with direct expertise in alcohol policy that are part of this work and these conversations as well, that are also willing to come out and talk to community groups or talk to decision makers or policy makers about these issues. Because for us, it's one thing to publish the paper, it's another thing to say, this is really something that could have implications for the community, and we're trying to help with that translation.
Hi, love some data. So just some questions about things that maybe we didn't see, because I'm sure that these studies were really comprehensive. So for example, the slide about MPS feels really good, right? Going into the high schools and then seeing the results. Mm-hmm. And how does the data account for the fact that the highest risk kids have either been kicked out or not showing up to school to receive that programming? So is that being accounted for in some other way in the program? And sort of the same question with the alcohol outlets, as you called them. Is that a proxy for something else? Is there a higher concentration in these areas? Is there something about that type of business besides the fact that they sell alcohol, and how deep have you gone into that?
Both really great questions. So with the particular part that I showed about MPS, that was essentially for the schools that 414 Life has gone into with the curriculum. So it's not everywhere yet. But their focus within those schools is actually on students that were identified by teachers and others as being high risk. Now, that doesn't account for the students that are not in school. But we have other work that is where we're seeing that and looking at what else might be happening. So one of the things that we do is we look at all of the homicides involving young people, essentially. And we track risk factors. We look at other things that are going on. Absenteeism and dropping out, we're seeing as a common risk factor. So we're working on some research around that right now. Part of it is to understand, is there a point at which we can say we're seeing this as a risk factor for a student that really needs intervention now, right? How can we take some of what we're seeing and turn it again into practices that could be tested? For the alcohol outlets, that particular study did do comparisons to things like other commercial areas, trying to control for other factors within the geographic area. And what we're still seeing is, despite controlling for many of those factors, that having the alcohol outlet there still is related to a higher likelihood of seeing gun violence, both in the immediate environment and even out for a number of blocks. Great questions.
Mm-hmm. Good morning. Thank you for all that data. I mean, that was a lot to try to take in. But I'm curious to know, do you have, or have you collected data on some of these same issues relative to other communities that are similar in size to Milwaukee, and what does that data reveal?
So not as much, it's something we talk about all the time, right? We talk about it both in terms of how do we look at what's happening when we have an intervention in a particular neighborhood even. Some of that it's challenging, right? So we do look at overall national trends and some of the other general trends within other cities, but part of what's so hard is a lot of those cities have other initiatives as well that we may not even be aware of. So at this point, not a lot of really specific comparisons, more kind of broad, what are we seeing in terms of other at least similarly sized, similar demographic cities. And part of what we're actually seeing is that we're decreasing more right now in gun violence than some of those other cities are. We want that trend to continue, right? We want to not only be going down, but showing that we're doing something that's having an even bigger impact than maybe what we're seeing at a national level.
Hi, thanks so much for the presentation and all the data. My question is, do you think, and also acknowledging for a moment that there are ethical and practical difficulties with this, do you think there's a role for like social network analysis in targeting interventions or highlighting, social networks of people that might benefit from things like violence intervention? And is there a way to apply that to the interventions we're talking about today?
Yes, I do think there's the potential. We've done a little bit of that work, but what you said is actually, at the beginning of your statement, was actually the biggest challenge, right? We want to make sure, again, that we're not further stigmatizing, or we're not, to use kind of an older term, we're not net widening, right? We also don't want to be identifying individuals that we may be pulling into contact that probably would be better off if they didn't have contact with systems in a variety of ways. But I do think that's an important consideration. The other thing that I was going to mention earlier and just was trying to get through everything is we're also paying a lot of attention to what do we need to think about for social media, which ties into social networks to some extent, because we're seeing such a prevalence of escalation of situations on social media, but also thinking about how can we use social media in a positive way to get messaging out, and get messaging out in a way that's going to resonate with those we're trying to reach, right? If I do a social media piece, nobody's going to, that we want to pay attention, is going to pay attention to me, right? I'm just not the right person. But we're looking at working with individuals who are influencers within the local community that will speak to young people in a way that may resonate, but thinking about messaging around gun violence that can utilize social media in a positive way as well. We do have, when we look at kind of the social media, social network connection, one of the things that, for example, 414 Life does is pay attention to the social media accounts of the individuals they're working with to see where there might be escalation, where there might be other connections happening. So I think that's part of, on the ground, what's happening from a social network and social media perspective as well.
Was there one more question down here? No? Okay. We're gonna hold off on questions because we got to get rolling with our next panel. Everyone just stay seated as we make the transition to the next, for the panel discussion. And let's give Dr. Kostelac one more round of applause. All right, so our next panel is set to go, but I first want to introduce the Honorable Derek Mosley, who serves as the director of the Lubar Center for Public Policy Research and Civic Education at Marquette University Law School. A former Milwaukee Municipal Court judge, Derek has been a champion of justice, equality, and community engagement throughout his career. His leadership at the Lubar Center continues to inspire public discourse on critical social issues, fostering dialogue, education across the community. He will be moderating our next panel discussion, Hospital-Based Gun Violence Prevention, Promoting Healthier and Safer Communities Through Community-Centered, Trauma-Informed, and Restorative Strategies. And Derek and I often try to collaborate through the Lubar Center and the Andrews Center for Restorative Justice, and I'm so pleased that he's here to help us today. Derek.
Thank you, Mary. Is it morning? It is morning. Good morning, everyone. I am, as Mary mentioned, Derek Mosley, and actually, Mary used to be my boss when I was on the bench, and so now we're colleagues, which is great. I'm going to welcome you to the Lubar Center. This is a place where myself and in the back, Hillary DuBlois, where we host events as well, and this is a perfect event that is our mission here at the Lubar Center fits perfectly with our venue. So, when I first watched the film that many of us watched a portion of earlier today, I talked to Mary about it after I watched it because it had an effect on me that I didn't think it would have. And specifically the testimony from RJ in that film. And the reason why I wanted to talk about it first before we get started and I introduce the panel, when we talk about gun violence and violence in the community, in my experience from the bench, is that sometimes it shows itself in places that you wouldn't think it would show itself. So an example was RJ. You know, they just finished a basketball game, they're headed home, they're excited about the game, they're on the bus, and somebody who they didn't even know has an encounter with them that results in the death of one of RJ's friends. And it made me think about a time when I was on the bench where how you see how gun violence makes an appearance or violence makes an appearance on things that you do on the bench. I had a young man who was 14 years old who was just in my court for a truancy. He just wasn't going to school. And so I'm talking to him and I said, hey, why aren't you going to school? And he says, I don't know. And I go, talk to me, why aren't you going to school? He wouldn't say anything. And so I took him back into my chambers and it was just he and I I said, well, it's just us now, you can open up. And he just opens up this whole story about how a local gang had put a hit on him. And they said that if he showed up for school, they were going to kill him. And so he wasn't even going to school because he was fearful of what would happen to him. And here I am thinking I'm going to handle a case that has to do with truancy, just going to school. But the ultimate thing, the overlying topic was violence and violence that was threatened against him. So because we're talking about this topic, we put together an unbelievable panel of subject matter experts. I want to introduce them real quick. I'm going to start, just because it's in the order that people are sitting here next to me, I'm going to start with Mary Libby Schroeder, doctor, chief medical officer at Frederick Hospital, associate professor of surgery at the Medical College of Wisconsin. Can we please give her a round of applause? Next to her, we have Terry Daroon Cassini, professor, Department of Surgery, Trauma and Acute Care Surgery, Psychiatry and Behavioral Medicine at the Institute of Health and Equity, director of the Comprehensive Injury Center at the Medical College of Wisconsin, I believe co-director of the Milwaukee Trauma Outcomes Project. We give her a round of applause as well. Next to Terry, we have Reggie Moore, director of the Division of Community Safety Policy and Engagement, Comprehensive Injury Center at the Medical College of Wisconsin. And finally, last but not least, Colleen Trevino, Associate Professor, Nurse Practitioner, Department Director of Advanced Practice, Division of Trauma and Acute Care Surgery, Department of Surgery, Director of the Division of Injury Science, Comprehensive Injury Center at the Medical College of Wisconsin. Hey, you put that together. So I want to start just because I want everybody to get an idea who all of you are. So, Doctor, I'll start with you right next to me. And I'll just start with, tell us in your role now, and not just as the Chief Medical Officer, but your role, surgery role, exactly what it is that you do on a daily basis. What is it you do?
I took over as CMO in August, so I honestly have no idea what I do. Just to start with, to be honest. So I have been in Milwaukee for 4 years. I moved here in the middle of the pandemic, having done all my training on the East Coast. I'd been in Washington, D.C. for over a decade, and then in northern New Jersey for a bit, and was doing, had always had a passion for global work, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, and so was doing a bunch of work in that realm as my academic work, and met the chief of trauma here in southern Ethiopia. And as I like to tell people, it turns out if you volunteer to do things and you do them on time, it kind of sets you apart from a lot of other people. And so he recruited me out to take a job here. I had no idea what I was getting into in terms of, I didn't really know Milwaukee at all. We had come for 3 days. We went to a Bucks game. I thought that was fun. Yep, go Bucks. They looked great on Wednesday night. And I showed up and quickly realized that I was in a very different environment from a trauma standpoint than I was used to with the amount of penetrating trauma. And I arrived in June of 2020. One of the first nights I was on call was the Kenosha shootings. I kind of started looking around and asking some questions. And so my day-to-day, at least back then, was I was a trauma surgeon. I took, about 10 day shifts and 5 night shifts on any given month, but quickly realized the opportunity to work on the prevention side and hitched my cart to these folks. And they were lucky enough to take me in and try to explain to me what was going on and all the dynamics that were going on in this city and the history of them. And so in addition to the work of, taking people to an operating room and sewing up holes and trying to make people physically better, the recognition that if you just do that as a trauma surgeon, and I think we're seeing this around the country, it's just too much. It just feels really hopeless. And so for a good chunk of us, we end up getting involved in the prevention side as a way to feel like we are trying to put ourselves out of business. And with the recognition that it means that we get to work with these great people from kind of different professional backgrounds, which makes life a whole lot more interesting. And now I do administrative stuff, which is like a whole different ball of wax that we can talk about some other time.
Terry?
Yeah, I started at MCW in Frederick Hospital a little over 16 years ago, actually after I graduated from Marquette with my PhD here. Before that, the trauma center, the level 1 trauma center at Frederick Hospital did not provide post-trauma mental health care to its patients. And if you think about that, it's kind of surprising, right? It just makes sense to provide mental health care to people who recently were injured and for many thought that they were going to lose their life in that incident. And so I was brought to MCW to start the post-trauma mental health care program for the Level 1 Trauma Center at Frederick. And so in the beginning of my career, I was trying to figure it out because at the time there was only one other trauma center in the country that had a psychologist embedded in trauma care. And so it was a lot of figuring out how do we provide the best care possible for those that are really in need. Our psychological care that we provide is both inpatient and outpatient. And then over the years, part of what I was asked to do as well was to develop a research program around what we were doing. And that was what started the Milwaukee Trauma Outcomes Project, which is a collaborative actually with researchers here at MCW and at UWM to try to really understand who's at risk for post-trauma mental health care or mental health outcomes, and how do we provide even better intervention so that we can prevent distress after trauma. And then, so I do a lot of research now. My time has shifted quite a bit. However, I'm also the psychologist for our Trauma Quality of Life Clinic. It's our gun violence clinic where we provide interdisciplinary care to our firearm injured patients that are treated at our Level 1 Trauma Center. And then 4 years ago, I had the privilege of starting to lead the Comprehensive Injury Center at MCW. It's an injury prevention center that's been at MCW since the 90s. But we made some changes to the injury center. We restructured some things and really started to emphasize areas of injury that we really feel like are impacting marginalized communities, both in Milwaukee and across the state of Wisconsin. And we really are committed to that. And as you all know, Dr. Kostelac mentioned that we just received our CDC designation as an injury prevention control research center. And so we are continuing to push forward to make sure that we're addressing those communities that are marginalized and are experiencing significant health disparities. And so the day-to-day is very different. Every day is different at MCW and Freighter, but it incorporates research, clinical care, and also a lot of education of trainees that are involved in both of those things.
Thank you.
All right.
Reggie?
Reggie Moore, Director, Division of Community Safety. My journey to this particular role, actually, I never thought about my work in terms of working in violence prevention. A lot of my background is in youth development as well as community organizing. And it was in late 2015 that I was approached by the mayor's office, Mayor Barrett at the time, and his team around taking on the role of leading the Office of Violence Prevention. And my non-negotiable in accepting that role, in addition to a lot of prayer, family support, and community consultation, was that the community would need to define the priorities, not just for the office, but for what it means to produce community safety in Milwaukee. And that's the process over a year that led to what's been referenced as the Blueprint for Peace. And so I led the office for 5 years and was at that, coming out of the pandemic, which I thought at the beginning of the pandemic, it would be the lowest level of gun violence in the world because everybody was in the house. But unfortunately, as we all know, that was the opposite across the country. And so after that, I was really looking to do more national work. And at the same time, Dr. Darun Cassini had took over the Comprehensive Injury Center. And we have been co-conspiring as a team even prior to that. So when we launched Forum for Life, for example, it was under Terry's leadership as well as Dr. Milia and the former president of Freighter, Eric Conley, who I thought it would take years to convince that we needed a hospital component to the street outreach and mediation work that we were doing. But as Dr. Libby-Schober mentioned, they had already been asking the question of what should we be doing as a community to prevent the harm that's showing up in this trauma bay every night. And so again, they moved hell and high water to actually execute the hospital component of the program. And basically we just couldn't get rid of each other since. And things have evolved and grown, which you'll hear about momentarily, but it's been an honor to work with this team and happy to answer questions about the Blueprint as we continue the conversation.
Hi, I'm Colleen Trevino. I have been a nurse practitioner with the Division of Trauma and Acute Care Surgery for 23 years. So lots of taking care of patients after their injury. And when Terry came, it was, I think, maybe the first turn where we definitely recognized the need for mental health in the hospital as well as after care, after they're discharged. And we had many conversations about we can do better, we can, there was a point where I would not ask the questions of, are you safe at home? Are you having nightmares? Are you doing okay? Because I couldn't give them a resource or an answer or how to fix it. So when Terry came and we had talked about this, like how can we make this better and how can we change how we care for our patients? And so when she came, we developed the mental health resource embedded within the division and in our patients' care on our day-to-day going to their bedside and asking the questions, and then knowing what we could do and providing that resource. Then in 2018, we had a little pilot program because we knew that it's not just mental health care, it's physical functioning, it's development of chronic pain, development of PTSD, depression, anxiety, not getting back to their work, having issues with safety at home. And so we did a pilot with our trauma quality of life clinic, which I was the trauma medical provider. Dr. Darun Cassini was the mental health provider, psychologist. We had a physical therapist there, a social worker, and we thought we did just a little pilot. We only got a little permission, just a little permission for just a little pilot, and we showed that it improved engagement in care. So we had a typical no-show rate, meaning patients don't show up for their follow-up appointments, is about 40%, a little bit higher for a firearm injury, about 45%, and we dropped it to 20%. So we knew we were engaging patients in getting the care that they needed after discharge. And then this little thing called 414 Life showed up, and really showed us that with this partnership, we could focus on the population of mechanism of injury that is at highest risk for PTSD, depression, anxiety, poor physical functioning, and chronic pain, and that was our firearm injury patients. So we went ahead, and after about a year of connecting with the 414 Life group, or person, and Reggie, at that time we only had one hospital-based violence interrupter, and she was phenomenal. But what she did was connect us with our patients, and provided us with some credibility in that we really wanted to do better, and that we needed to partner with our patients in order to get improved outcomes. So then we developed our trauma quality of life clinic specifically for our firearm injury patients in 2020 at the height of this huge increase in firearm injury in our community. And it's probably the coolest thing that anybody has done in the States, because it doesn't exist anywhere else. There are some programs, but they are not as comprehensive as what we have. So now we have our 414 Life hospital-based violence interrupters, and then we also have our community VIs who will come in. He will come into clinic if we need him, to help improve the engagement. And that was perfect, actually. And what we have seen is actually our no-show rate. 20% is good, but 12% is even better.
All right.
So.
That's awesome. So, Reggie, I'm going to start with you because I actually heard you referred to this when I was in a Common Council Judd Legg meeting. They said
Fun times.
Yeah, they said they referred to Reggie as the architect of the blueprint. And so could you just please describe the blueprint for peace and give it an idea? Because it was mentioned in the last session, and it was asked how many people were aware of it, and not a lot of hands went up. So I just wanted to make sure that people were aware of it.
And for those that want to check it out online, you can go to 414life.com. I think I'll accept the term architect, but the builders of the blueprint were the community, and the owners of the blueprint are the community. It contains 6 goals and 30 strategies, which again reflect the priorities of survivors, of individuals who have perpetrated gun violence in their life and were in a different space, young people, parents who had lost children to gun violence, people working in domestic violence, healthcare professionals, and others in this community who all have a stake in increasing the level of safety that we experience. And one of the lessons that I learned along that journey were a couple of things. At the launch meeting, which happened to be at Discovery World, there were about 150 folks in the room. And this is where we were actually asking permission of the community to engage in this year-long process. And basically, do we need another plan? Because for those of you who are from Milwaukee or been in Milwaukee for a long time, we have no shortage of plans. And there's a level of planning fatigue that people experience because nothing happens after the plans are released. And so our commitment on the front end was to say, and even with the mayor and other executives in the city who are part of the steering committee, if we ask the community what we should be doing, we have a responsibility to be responsive to that. And not just in word, but in policy and investment. And not short term, but long term. Because this is a paradigm shift. Because the norm is we just need more cops, courts, and cages. And unfortunately, America locks up more people than any other country in the world. If that was the sole answer to reducing violence, this would be the safest place in the world. And so we have to do something different. And the blueprint was a framework and a North Star for us as a community to say, to like Connie mentioned earlier, how do we move collectively in the same direction? And instead of pointing fingers about who's not doing what, how do we actually have shared accountability to say, these are the things that the community has demanded that we do. Are we accountable to being responsive to that or not? And so again, when we think about, when launched in 2017, coincided with a steady 3-year decline in homicides and non-fatal shootings. Unfortunately, the pandemic set us back significantly, not only as a city, but as a country. And we're now starting to see those declines. And it's not just a coincidence, but the fact that the current federal administration has invested unprecedented amounts of resources into community violence intervention programs like Credible Messengers, Forward for Life, and other programs across the country. And so, again, we still need to get back to pre-pandemic levels, but I also want to stress the absence of violence cannot be our only metric. Everybody deserves to live and to be safe. We have to actually have life measures around how many young people are being, experiencing a quality education, receiving supports. When we think about the goal around focused on healing and restorative justice, when people do experience a traumatic event, that they have access to quality health care and psychological and supportive services to recover from that. Those are the things that we should also be accountable for and holding ourselves accountable to.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Dr. Darun-Cassini, you were the first to mention mental health in this conversation about what you do. And so I just wanted to know, what role does mental health play in breaking the cycle of violence? And then how do you integrate that into psychological care into your patients who've suffered through violence?
That's such a great question. So just to put it into context, about 8% of the population in the United States has something called PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. So if we do a large epidemiologic studies, that's what we'll see. Individuals who experience a motor vehicle crash, for example, have anywhere between 18 to 20% likelihood of developing PTSD. Individuals that experience firearm injury, 40 to 50% develop post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. If you look at those military service members that have served in theater, 30% develop PTSD. It's important to put that into context because if we think about it, the mental health burden that individuals in our country experience is really shouldered by those individuals that have exposure to firearm-related injury and violence-related injury. And so it's important for us to think about also comorbidities when it comes to mental health and PTSD. The rates of depression are almost at the same level as PTSD for firearm injury survivors. And it's also really important to think about the ripple effect of firearm-related injury. I don't know about any of you, but sometimes the news reporting is annoying. And they talk about firearm-related homicides, and then they talk about non-fatal shootings, but it's almost like celebratory, like this individual survived, this is wonderful, this is great, and it is. And yet the suffering that is experienced by those who've gone through being injured is really tremendous. And it is tremendous not just for them, but their family members. So, the question about social network analysis, there's actually a new professor at UWM who does social network analysis, and we were just talking the other day about how do you quantify the impact of non-fatal firearm-related injury on the social network of that individual, because it is not solely shouldered by the one who was injured themselves. And when we think about the role that mental health plays in prevention, preventing future firearm-related injury, future morbidity, I'll give an example. I had a patient who was shot. He was shot outside his home, and he had 8 children, and he was the breadwinner for his family, and he took a lot of pride in that. And his wife worked in the home, and after his injury, she had to find a job quickly to support the family. He had no way to have guaranteed income while he was recovering from his injury, and so he started to get quite depressed. And he also developed, oftentimes I talk about it like an alarm system for the White House. 24/7, 360-degree surveillance. When individuals experience PTSD, it's like the amygdala, which is part of the brain that detects fear, it goes on overdrive. It picks up on every noise. It picks up on every movement, where before the brain wouldn't pick up on those things because it didn't need to feel fear. And so individuals become hypervigilant. They're constantly checking around their environment. Oftentimes they can't sleep at night. And I don't know about any of you, but when I don't sleep at night, I get grumpy the next day. I'm irritable. I'm emotionally reactive, right? And usually I can catch up. Libby can probably attest to this. But imagine someone who's also not living in a safe environment. So their brain is not only trying to detect what is a safe environment for them, but all of a sudden trying to reconcile where I thought I was safe, I'm not safe anymore. And then they're trying to protect themselves, right? And so they become in a state of constant reactivity. And that constant reactivity can, by others, seem to be overreactive. But for them, they're at a place of day-to-day survival. And so we need to be thinking about how we can address mental health in those that are experiencing chronic trauma, as well as these single incident events, because their post-trauma is not really post, it's ongoing. And addressing things like emotion regulation and finding ways to discern a sense of safety in an environment that always isn't safe. And Connie talked about our neighborhoods that are overburdened by violence are those neighborhoods that have experienced cumulative social disadvantage for very clear reasons. And so you have individuals who aren't physically safe on top of individuals who don't have their basic needs met. And so they're already in a state of trying to survive on a daily basis by having enough food, having consistent housing and safe housing. And so it is this heightened state of arousal that can be really detrimental to one's emotional health, but also plays a huge role in behavior. And it needs to be an important part of prevention.
Oh, you can clap, please. Go ahead. To piggyback on that, Dr. Schroeder, what kind of systemic change has to happen, not only in hospitals, but also in the communities, to assist those patients after they leave the trauma center?
Like in under 2 minutes? You want me to give you an answer?
30 seconds, please.
In the hospital, I'm going to start there because it's super complex, but maybe a little bit easier. The patient population that we are talking about here is a patient population that has a huge amount of distrust for healthcare as a whole. And the reality is that when they arrive in our trauma bay, they are being treated by a team of people that do not look like them and do not necessarily come from their neighborhoods. And many of them have had a bad experience in the healthcare system, either them as an individual or a family member, that from the moment they arrive, you can imagine that they've just been traumatized and then they arrive and there's this lack of trust. And so some of the work that we have been doing collectively is just trying to rebuild that trust on the individual level. So things like this is going to sound so simple, and you're all going to be like, what's the matter with you physicians? But we started a program about a year ago. We changed the way we run our trauma resuscitations. So when somebody arrives in the trauma bay, and typically what happens is EMS brings them in. I wish Josh was here. Josh Parrish was here. We put them over on the bed, and it's like, everyone go. So we remove all their clothes, they're flat on their back, they're looking at the ceiling, there's a light in their eyes, and we're doing everything we can to save their lives. And that had been kind of the way we practiced trauma nationally, and that's what the guidelines tell you to do. And we started about a year ago changing it so that before we move somebody over, we simply say, hey, what's your name? You're here, you're at Freighter. We're all here to take care of you. We recognize that a lot's about to happen. We're gonna do everything we can to make sure you're okay. There were people that said, well, you can't lie to patients. I'm like, well, I'm not lying. I'm telling them I'm gonna do everything I can to make sure they're okay. I'm going to use touch and talk, and I'm going to try to just bring them back to where we are. So we are doing data analysis now because, like good researchers, we did a pre and post eval on this by interviewing about 400 patients total. And we are finding in the post-intervention group, a huge chunk of people remember that. They remember being told, you're here and we're here to take care of you. But the other thing we noticed almost immediately was it changed the whole tone of the team. Everybody started treating the patient like a human, like somebody they could relate to, rather than, the body we're taking care of. And that humanistic piece, I think, has been missing, and we all take fault because it's the way we train. It's super simple, but it's super impactful. And so little things like that. We are, there have been, from the time that the 414 Life team started spending more time in our hospital, initially with Tanya, and now with Mark and Shay and Aisha and Crystal, they started calling out things within our system that were, for lack of a way of putting it, racist. Do you all recognize that this is the perception of what you're doing? And one of the joys of my new job is that I then get to change those things. And so really trying to, a lot of it is well-intentioned but biased, which means it has to change. And there have been some very uncomfortable conversations recently with people who didn't enjoy the fact that we were gonna start changing some things. But we're slowly, we had a big win this week with a policy that I'm not even gonna talk about because can't believe it was policy. But anyway, we got rid of it. But so I think it's just, the recognition that these partnerships, and when you have this open communication, it's so invaluable. We only know what we know. And we need other perspectives in order to change the care that we provide.
Colleen? Yep, please. This might be the first panel that I've been a part of that everything you say is a mic drop. Everything that comes out. So Colleen, I'm gonna come to you, so don't blow it. But I'm gonna come to you, and I'm going to, you were in the film, and you partner with the Andrew Center when it comes to restorative justice circles. How do you think restorative justice circles can help your patients?
I think it is something that will, once again, another big change in our practice. We've had kind of a rough start trying to get people together, specifically for group therapy, and trying to get that off the ground and engage people, because we know that it's really effective. And when Judge Triggiano kind of talked to us about it and showed us and gave us some understanding about the objectives, it's a little bit the same and a little bit different about what kind of things we would talk about in that particular venue. And I think what happened for us as healthcare providers with our connection with 414 Life is that we got to see the different side of people. They now opened up, and when people open up and share that kind of vulnerability, it's you are seen as a human being, and they see it in us too. And so it puts us all on the same playing field, but it allows us to see their perspective and understand them. And I think that really changes our ability to connect, because what I have found is the connection is the most important thing in getting our patients to become engaged in the healthcare system. We really want to help, but we need to get them to trust us. And I think these circles are one of those ways to be able to get everybody to see each other's perspective.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Reggie, you mentioned the Blueprint of Peace. You went through, you took the title of architect of the Blueprint of Peace. But you made it a point that there was a restorative justice piece in the blueprint. Why did you do that? Why did you think it was important?
Again, I think the community, it sort of panned out that way because there were hundreds of priorities. And, getting down to 6 goals, 30 strategies, 88 very specific activities within the blueprint was a journey. And the ones that fall into goal 2 around healing and restorative justice. When you think about a public health approach, and you think about sort of the spectrum of prevention, in academic world, we talk about primary, secondary, and tertiary, and even on the front end, primordial, which is more, social, political. Instead of tertiary, I like the term healing. So basically, prevention, intervention, and healing. And so when I think about that particular goal, one of the things that, not only in my time at the city, but even as we've taken this movement statewide, at the medical college in partnership with the governor's office, it really is clear that when people experience harm or feel violated in some way, that the services and our semblance of what we call justice really is lacking. And I don't know how many of you have read the book Until We Reckon by Danielle Sarid. I highly encourage everybody in this room to read that book. And I think she was a speaker a couple years ago at the Justice Conference here. But it really talks about people who have been harmed oftentimes do not feel whole simply because that person is put away. People have questions as to why the harm occurred, why they were targeted, the impact that it had on them. And that's what restorative justice creates space for that conversation and for at least an opportunity to begin to repair that harm. I know in this current city budget, the Milwaukee Police Department is proposing the creation of 2 positions to really stay in contact with families, to update them on their investigations, and to ensure that there's not a breakdown in communication. And even in our work with 414 Life, oftentimes a major risk factor of retaliation is if people do not believe that the perpetrator of their harm will be brought to justice, and obviously street justice takes over. And so understanding that when we talk about healing and we talk about recovery, what that truly means, and understanding it's a journey. So even though in the moment people may forgive or they may decide I'm not going to retaliate, we often stay in contact with those people to ensure, because understanding that healing and all of that is a journey. And we recently visited Rwanda as a team in a genocide memorial there, and they have these things called reconciliation villages. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the genocide there were 2 basically tribes who were pitted against each other by colonial, imperialistic, racist policies, and basically resulted in a significant amount of death, and not by firearm, but by machetes. And in these villages, you have perpetrators and survivors, where one woman stood up in a village and talked about, I believe it was 6 of her children being killed, and one of the individuals who participated in that, he was in his 20s at the time, they're probably in their 60s or 70s now, talked about how he was ingrained and basically programmed to engage in that, and the level of remorse. And so when we look at globally, and some of the questions they asked of us is what the hell is going on in America? And so when we look at, in terms of gun violence and other forms of harm, whether in the community or even politically, there are other lessons that we're looking around the world to say, what does it mean for people to journey back to each other after harm has happened? And we have a lot to learn. I know it's a long answer, I'm sorry.
No, that was perfect. No. So,
It continues.
yeah, it continues. So, Terry, I'm just going to ask you, can you share for us a success story?
There was an individual who, Tania Lydell was our first hospital responder, and she was amazing at her job. And one of the things that she did, you know, some of our young men of color, when I approach them as a shrink, as a psychologist, they are apprehensive. They're apprehensive because culturally, engaging in mental health care is not the norm. And they're apprehensive because I look very different than they do. What could I understand about their life? And so Tania, she knew this, and part of the building of Foreign for Life at the hospital was also building relationships with the entire team and understanding that we were all here for the same reason. We wanted to prevent injury. We wanted to prevent suffering. And so we quickly connected, and we all knew that we were doing this all for the right reasons. And so there was a young gentleman who was on his way home. He was hanging out at his buddy's house, and he was driving home. His buddy was following him in his car. They were headed home to go play video games. He recently graduated college, and so he was home and starting to work for his uncle's business. And he got caught in crossfire on his way home, brought to our medical center, and was having clear PTSD-like symptoms. And he came to the Trauma Quality of Life Clinic. I think I saw him once in the hospital, and he was pretty reserved. You know, he kind of said, "I'm fine, I'm good." And so then we saw him in the TQual clinic, and Tania picked up on right away that he was having nightmares, he was having flashbacks, and he was reluctant to engage in mental health care. And Tania said, "Look, this is such an issue, and this is also something that needs to be addressed so much that we have a psychologist here to treat this, and it's a part of the care that's provided at this institution because we want to make sure it doesn't get in the way of you living your life." People with PTSD can isolate, they can have difficulty working, they can have difficulty doing the things that bring them joy. And so she said, "Look, I know Terry, and I know that she wants to help you, and I just want you to give it one shot. I want you to talk to her." And so he did. He came in, and we provided mental health care for him, and he was very open to addressing his trauma. After we met a couple times, addressing trauma is hard work from a mental health standpoint. It takes a lot of bravery to address the thing that you fear the most. And he did it, and he did it extremely well. And so I got to be just a bit of a guide for him in that process. And then I think the success for me at the end, his symptoms went down. He was back to work with his uncle. He was also starting to think about what the next stage of life was for him. You know, I said, okay, so your symptoms have gone down. You no longer meet criteria for PTSD. You've met the goals that we've outlined for you. So it's time, we talk about discharging from the clinic. And he's like, "I just want to keep doing therapy. I've got other things I want to talk about." And so we, in our clinic, we focus on trauma and the mental health care that is resulting from trauma. So we transitioned him to a community provider because he learned it's okay to engage in mental health care. It's a part of wellness. It's a part of what helps him to achieve the goals that he wants in life. It's not stigmatizing to take care of your own well-being. And so I think that was what stands out most recently is a great success story.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
So at this time, I'm going to open it up for questions. Does anybody have any questions for the panel?
Thank you all. This has just been phenomenal. And Connie, this is also kind of a question for you. Nice to see you. Is anyone doing any research on whether or not incarceration actually increases the chances of violence in the community? You know, I've read Danielle Sered's book twice, and she posits that incarceration is actually criminogenic. And there's so many confounding factors. I bet it's really hard to tease that out, but is anybody looking at that?
No, we are not directly doing that research, but I would agree, right? I would also say that we don't do a great job in our country at all of reintegration of those that are formerly incarcerated. We kind of just let them figure it out. And sometimes when you let people just to try to figure it out, and again, they're in that place of trying to survive, they go down paths that maybe they went down before because they need to survive. And so I would agree with that sentiment. Connie, I don't know if you have anything else to say. There's a mic behind you.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know of any directly at the moment, but the question's actually come up a couple times recently. And I think we do have enough research and evidence out there to know that any form of incarceration has worse outcomes, right, than alternatives. And so we know, whether that be pretrial, whether that be longer term incarceration, that it tends to, we have more challenges for people on a variety of levels, including recidivism and re-engagement in violence and other types of criminal behavior. But I do think the question of, it comes back to why the alternatives are so critical, right? And the way we're looking at everything from diversion and deflection programs where individuals are connected to the criminal justice system, but we know it's better to keep them out, to everything that you're hearing about today in terms of working with individuals that may be at risk of violence. So I think it's a really important question that actually needs more research, but what we do know is that incarceration does harm on a whole variety of levels.
Connie, get on that right away.
I will add it to the list.
Yeah. The one thing I will say is that we have actually done some research around for those who have law enforcement engaged during their hospital stay. So we have a lot of patients that come in, they have law enforcement engaged, either they're detained pending investigation, typically, occasionally they're under arrest, but that's less likely, and a lot of times they stay in that status throughout their hospital stay until they get discharged, and then the question becomes whether they become a book and release or they make it over to the station. But when we discharge them, we're discharging them to jail. And we did a study last year in which we showed that the follow-up rates, the use of, we got the metrics we got, but ED utilization is higher in that group, readmissions are higher, no-shows to clinic are higher. I mean, we lose more of those people once they get likely booked and released. Actually, if they end up staying in the jail or prison, we're more likely to see them. And so we are working now with law enforcement and the jail hospitals and the jail physicians to try and improve that process and that communication to see if we can capture more of those people and make sure they're getting the care they need. We also then on the inpatient side are looking at those who have law enforcement engaged, their ability to engage in physical therapy. So particularly if you're under arrest and you're in cuffs or shackles, like how do we get you up and mobilize you? Their ability to interact with mental health providers. You can't really ask somebody to have a conversation about the circumstances around what led them to be there while a cop is sitting in the room. So trying to change our hospital policies to make it so that law enforcement, when everybody feels it's safe, can exit the room to allow those conversations to happen. So on the healthcare side, yes, I feel pretty confident telling you it interferes with care.
Hi, just from a practical standpoint, how does this service get paid for? You know, you've just been through something, and now mental health is something that isn't paid for a lot of times. So I'm just wondering how you address that.
Well, thankfully, due to Obamacare, actually insurance coverage went way up. And so we actually do at our institution, if someone comes in who's un or underinsured, we have people at our institution that help to make sure that patients have insurance by the time they leave. And so it's really not too much of an issue for us to make sure that their health care is paid for. We're also really creative about finding ways. We don't want ability to pay to be what prevents somebody or not from getting health care and mental health care. So, for example, we have 3 levels of training programs as a part of our trauma psychology service now. So we have a fellowship. It's a 2-year, half research, half clinical fellowship. Dr. Pace, who I don't think is here, is our current fellow. And so she doesn't bill for service. So she can see patients. If a patient comes in and they're uninsured, it's not a problem. And then we have our residency. We have a health psychology residency, and our program is one of the major rotations for the residency. The residents come to TQual Clinic with us, and they also see patients inpatient. And again, they don't bill for service. They're trainees. They are trying to get the hours that they need to go on to match to then go on to onto fellowship. And then we have graduate students, one of whom is here, Kaylin Vine. She's in her 2nd year with us. She staffs our trauma quality of life clinic with me. Again, she doesn't bill for service, but she gets to be a part of this innovative care that we provide. And also make sure that we improve access to care for everybody who needs it.
2 more questions, one over here and one here, and then they'll answer questions out in the hallway when we take our break.
Yeah, I do want to just add that 92% of our patients are insured on when they come to us. The majority of them are Medicaid insurance through Badger and we were trying to figure out, like, wow, we have an amazing amount of insurance, but it's related to the way the state of Wisconsin provides or signs people up for the resources that are necessary for them at that time. So the majority of our patients actually do have health insurance when they come to see us after their injury.
Really quick, what is the need for expansion? Is there more data that you all need to collect to say, hey, this works, right? So can you all talk about if there is a need for an expansion of this project?
I can take that.
There's a setup.
So Forward for Life is primarily funded by the city of Milwaukee. We're a program of the Office of Community Wellness and Safety, and the medical college is the implementation partner. We're the only medical school in the country that houses a violence intervention program. And I mentioned this briefly last night. The intentionality and the power of that is when you look at these types of programs around the country, oftentimes the workers are part-time, they don't have benefits, and they're doing extremely risky work. They don't have a badge or gun or 2,000 sworn backup to show up. All they have is their credibility, their experience, and their training to try to interrupt and break the cycle of violence. And so the fact that they have the same benefits, they're full-time as even the healthcare professionals at the medical college, is pretty profound. In terms of expansion, definitely needed. We also get some support also from Milwaukee County and a few national funders as well. But given the volume of gun violence in the city, and I'm sure James would attest, and Lynn, who's the program director of Forum for Life, that the level of need is great. And so the more, and we don't want our staff to burn out. And so the more that we can be able to have more folks doing this work, the better.
Add to that. Because Councilwoman Moore is asking the question, we need a trauma recovery center for Milwaukee. We need, I would liken it somewhat to what the Sojourner Family Peace Center does, but we need it for community violence. You know, when we have the Trauma Quality of Life Clinic on the adult side, and then we talked about this, I think, yesterday. There's the PEDS clinic now, the TQual clinic at Children's. But you know, when someone's injured, it affects the whole family. It affects everybody. We need a building, we need a place where we can bring these services to individuals, not out in Tosa, because I know our address is Milwaukee, but we're in Tosa. And we need it in the communities where the violence is happening, where we can bring all of these resources to those who need it and their family members, their loved ones.
All right, last question here.
Hello, Andron Lane. I don't know if it's a question, more of a statement, or I don't know, venting. It's kind of hard for me to not see how reentry doesn't tie into the community response. We want to look at what 50%, 60% of reentry individuals struggle with mental health, PSTD, right? But we have what 10% of the individuals who are working in violence prevention work are reentry individuals. How do we prepare those who are coming home to have better assistance, but also put something in place that when we are going into prison, or what are the social workers or therapists that are right there in the booking, that are going through that service with us to help us understand what services are needed prior to us even going through the change of even going to prison? Is that kind of like a statement?
Yeah, I'm gonna dovetail that onto an additional answer I wanted to be. I think Terry downplays, oh yeah, you know, we can treat everyone. You give us 10 more mental health providers, we got plenty of people who need them, right? And the team she has built is largely built on her busting her tail, writing grants, convincing people that this is an essential service. There's a move within trauma as of January 1st of this year. The Committee on Trauma requires all trauma centers to be able to screen and refer for level 1 and level 2 trauma centers for mental health. But that still is, the majority of centers are doing a screening process and then handing people a Xeroxed piece of paper that says, here's the stuff in the community that you can go try and find yourself. The fact that we have this integrated and it's more of an opt-out than an opt-in, which we know is what's needed, right? If we had more resources, we would expand to wherever the community tells us we could need. At the moment, we got enough going on right within the four walls of Freighter to take up all of Terry's team's time, and we still probably have people that we're not touching in the way we should. So.
No, I just thank you for that comment or question. Just briefly, I totally agree with you. I know that at least half of our team has been system impacted, but reentry starts even before release. And one of the things that we've been talking internally about is how do we engage, whether it's with DOC or other system or institutions, to say how do we identify people that actually might be good doing this work upon release and supporting them in that journey. But then also, if they need support from Forum for Life, how do they become a part of our, what we call a caseload or participant crew, in terms of being able to receive that mentorship and support, because often they may be returning to a situation or a community where there's conflicts, where people are waiting for them to get out in order to find them, or because of the PTSD and other issues, have this heightened sense of, I need to carry a firearm to be safe because I don't feel safe coming back, especially if they've been away for over a decade, et cetera. So those are things that we're thinking intentionally about, but your point is well taken.
All right, let's give everyone a round of applause. All right, thank you. Welcome back. That was a great panel discussion. I'm very honored and excited to introduce our keynote speaker here today, Father David Kelly. Father Kelly's commitment to restorative justice is deeply rooted in his academic and theological journey. Father Kelly earned his doctorate in ministry from the Catholic Theological Union. His dissertation, Responding to the Violence Among Urban Youth, a Restorative Approach, serves as a cornerstone of his life's work, exploring the transformative power of restorative justice within the context of faith and community, and how restorative practices could be integrated into the criminal justice system as a more humane and effective response to crime. His dissertation also laid the groundwork for his later efforts in violence prevention and community healing. The scholarly work not only informed his approach at Precious Blood Ministry of Reconciliation, but also contributed to the broader restorative justice movement across the United States. For more than 30 years, Father Kelly has worked as a chaplain in Cook County Jail and Cook County Juvenile Temporary Detention Center. In 2002, Father Kelly helped found the Precious Blood Ministry of Reconciliation in Chicago, where he now serves as its executive director. He is a nationally renowned expert in reconciliation, restorative justice, and jail detention ministry, and speaks and writes extensively about these topics. Let's please warmly welcome Father Kelly, our keynote speaker.
I don't know who wrote that. I'm known by my family and by my community, and that's about it. So it's great to be here. And thank you for the panel that just was here. I kept thinking, with all that knowledge, all that passion, all that experience, how we can make that a reality in the communities in which I come from and many people come from. I'm going to tell 3 stories before I get started. One is a young man I've known for 10 years. He's an incredible young man. He's overcome an incredible amount. And he got picked up with a gun. He was celebrating going to the next level at his job at ComEd, and he was with his wife, and he's about 30 years old. He got picked up with a gun. It was her gun. She's a registered gun owner, but it was put on him. And he goes to court, and I go to court with him, and I'm sitting in the gallery, if you will, and Lamont walks in, and he's dressed in a white button-up shirt. He's got his dreads pulled back tight. He's got black slacks on, and he's got what he calls church shoes. And as I sat there and watched him stand in front of a judge, a white judge, white state's attorney, white public defender, and they spoke to him the way they spoke to him, I almost teared up because I wanted to scream out, "You don't know him." Lamont was trying to look the way he thought they wanted him to look. And they didn't know the reality, the incredible giftedness that Lamont brings to his family and to his community. That's the disconnect of so much of what we know and what we do. The other story is I go to juvenile detention center in Cook County all the time. I'm chaplain there for 40-some years. The only advantage of that is they don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing, so I can kind of do what I want to do because I've been there longer than they have. But I was talking to a young man in intake, 12 years old. And I was sitting there and I was talking to him. He's a charmer. He's got this incredible personality. And along the conversation, I said, "You know, what do you want to do?" And he looked at me and said, "I'd like to grow up to be your age." What 12-year-old thinks that way about his life? What 12-year-old thinks about the fact that he may not live? There's 3 things I know. Young people in our community know someone, a father, an uncle, a brother, a cousin, who's been killed. Our young people know that to walk from our center, the south side of Chicago, to the local park, which is a stone's throw away, is a dangerous journey. The doctors were talking about hypervigilance and being acutely aware of your surroundings. Every noise, every car is noticed. High alert. They know it's dangerous to go from our center to a park less than 100 yards away. And they know or feel that adults don't have their back, that adults can't protect them. And so with the amount of guns in our neighborhood, we have 14-year-olds carrying a gun, not to do harm, not to commit a crime, but because they don't feel safe. I've been working in jails and detention centers for a long time. It's why I'm a priest, frankly. I entered a jail in the late 70s, living in an African-American parish, just graduated from college, where I did pre-med, where I didn't think I was going to be a priest, so I wanted something marketable, something I could fall back on, no offense to philosophy majors. But that experience of walking into that jail and living in that culture was so different than me, just stirred something in me that was felt deeply, and that I've carried for the rest of my life. So I left that experience, that year of working in that jail and working and living in that parish. I came to Chicago to do my grad studies. And there I entered into an internship that lasted 45 years at Cook County Juvenile Detention Center. And once I was ordained as a young priest, I was sent to what is Colby House at Assumption, a ministry for the Archdiocese of Chicago, a jail ministry for the Archdiocese of Chicago. And in that ministry, the priest who founded it believed that what people need most who are impacted by the criminal justice system is a sense of connectedness, sense of community, a sense of a safe place where people don't judge them, where people accept them, where people look like them. And so we had this parish-based jail ministry in a parish, in a neighborhood, a block and a half from the county jail, where violence and incarceration was not something they read about, but rather something that was experienced. And we worked hard to enable people to come through that experience, that horrific experience of being in Cook County Jail or Cook County Juvenile Detention Center, to come back into community. But I was a parish priest too, a young one. And we were on a gang boundary between Latin kings and Satan's disciples. And I did a lot of funerals, 16-year-olds, 15-year-olds. And I'd accompany those families and watch those families with the devastation of losing a child to gun violence. Then I'd go into the jail and juvenile detention center. And oftentimes I'd encounter the person who did the harm. And I'd sit with them. And like so many that I sit with, I experienced their humanity, the goodness in their hearts, the remorse that they have in the journey they've been on. And I would accompany their families. In the United States, of course, we try our children as adults, even though we know that our children are not adults. They don't think like adults. Brain development goes up to what, 27? I think maybe mid-30s. And yet we still hold a 14-year-old accountable as though he was an adult, against all brain science, against all our knowledge. But somehow we feel that's going to protect us. And I'd accompany those families who'd lose their child to incarceration. A 14-year-old being automatically transferred to the adult court gets life without the possibility of parole. The Supreme Court ruled that's unconstitutional. So they resentenced him, gave him 60 years. Some of those cases in which I know the person who was harmed, the person who did the harm, were very personal, where I knew them very well. I knew both families. One was a young man who was shot just moments after he left our center. He's part of our after-school program. And I go to the scene, and from the scene to the hospital, and I sat there with his mom in the trauma center, in the waiting room, praying, hoping that he would survive. One of the bullets hit his heart. He began to survive, and about day 4 or 5, the police arrived with their manila folder with a picture clipped on the side. This is the person they had in custody. Could Alberto identify him as the shooter? And when they showed that picture, I recognized the young man they had in custody. They left. I stayed with Alberto and his mom for a little while longer and left that hospital room and went to Cook County Jail, Division 9, maximum security part of the jail, where they housed Wilfredo. Wilfredo was accused of shooting Alberto. And when I walked into that day room, which is a little bit smaller than this room, and cells on top and cells on the bottom, Wilfredo recognized me and said, "Damn, I knew you were coming." Because by then he knew that the person he shot was part of the parish and that I was soon to arrive, but also that I was someone that we had a relationship with, that he knew I cared about him and his family. And so I'd go from the jail cell to the hospital, and from the hospital to the jail cell. I'd go from Alberto in the hospital room, and he knew I was going to go visit the person who shot him. I'd go from Wilfredo in the jail, and he knew I was going to go visit the person who ultimately would testify against him in court. And they understood that, because that's the place where we occupy. About 2.5 years later, 3 years later, went to trial, and I'm sitting in this small room adjacent to the courtroom because I'm with Alberto and his mom, and he can't be in court because others are testifying and he can't hear their testimony. And the young state's attorney comes in to prep him for his testimony. This young state's attorney says, "Now look, this is the way I want you to frame this. You know, we want to send this guy away for a long time, and we want to really put him down." And I just leaned over at one point in time and told Alberto, "Just tell the truth." And this young state's attorney gets really ticked at me for interfering with his testimony. People who know me know when I get really angry, I turn very red. Maybe a word or two will come out. Ultimately, we went to trial. Wilfredo got 27 years in prison, and we were dismissed. We said, "You could go home now." They said, "You could go home now." So we went home. They to their apartment, me to the office. As I sat in my office, I couldn't help think, after all this time, 2.5, 3 years, no one ever asked Alberto, "Is there something we need to do for you? Is something that you need?" Nobody asked his mom, "Is there something we can do for you?" All the energy, all the resources went to getting Wilfredo, getting him good enough that he's a deterrent to other young people. I said, "We can do better than this. We can do better than this." And so in 2002, after working for Colby Else at Assumption for 30 years or more, we began also Precious Blood Ministry of Reconciliation. And it's a ministry that focuses on healing and accompanying those who are impacted by both violence and incarceration, and standing in that space in between and in betwixt, between those experiences. We began with 4 of us, just sitting around, what are we doing? And now there's about 35 individuals at Precious Blood Ministry of Reconciliation working in this effort. Men and women who've been impacted. Our program managers and our leadership are men who have done decades in prison. We talked earlier about credible messengers. They're the ones closest to these issues. They're the ones who can really have an impact in the lives of the young people and families who are experiencing incarceration, sometimes for decades, and violence. You know, in the church, anybody who's ever been a part of a liturgy team in a Christian church, Catholic church, you know that we do a really good job with ritual. Holy Saturday, or Holy Thursday, Good Friday, Easter Vigil, that period of time is very sacred and very powerful and very ritualistic. Has a lot of ritual to it. And anybody who's been a part of a parish knows you go from Good Friday and the veneration of the cross and all those kinds of things, and as soon as that last person leaves the church, you quickly take down the cross and you bring out the lilies and you bring out the candles and you get ready for Easter Vigil. You get ready for the joys of the resurrection. But you don't go from the horrors of the crucifixion to the joys of the resurrection in a day and a half. The space we occupy is Holy Saturday. Holy Saturday for Catholic and Christians is pretty much a liturgical void. You don't do anything. There's no masses. You might bless a few food baskets, but there's nothing really there. And yet that's where the church, in my mind, should live. That's the space we should occupy. That in between and in betwixt. In the shadows of the crucifixion, in the shadows of the trauma and the hurt and the pain, but maintaining the hope and the resilience of the resurrection. You know, we had a kid not that long ago shot and killed in our neighborhood, and he was one of those kids that everybody knew, everybody loved. He was at the center daily, participated in all the programming, even got his picture taken with Brian Stevenson, the author of Just Mercy and Equal Justice Project. And he was shot and killed. Devastated us. Devastated the community, the family. And we would gather. Soon after the shooting, we did what oftentimes they do is what we call candlelight, where we gather in our center and with candles and stories, we tell stories and light candles. Then we did a balloon release. We did the funeral. We did all those things, and yet still, if you saw in the faces of the young people who knew Brandon, there was this look on their face, this emptiness in their face. And so we gathered together and we continued that work. Judith Herman, who wrote Recovery and Trauma, says that what trauma does to you is fragments your lives. It don't make sense no more. Your life is completely apart. What you thought you were, no longer. You're no longer, if you lose a child, a homicide, you're no longer that mother. You're no longer looking forward to certain things that you spend your life looking forward to. Things don't make sense. Purpose and meaning aren't in my life anymore. And she says the only way you can repair that is through storytelling. It's through coming together and finding a safe enough space where you can tell your story. And it's listened to with dignity and love and respect and honor. I got called to see if I could intervene in a case where 20 years ago, a killing happened. A young man, 15, killed a 14-year-old. And this was 20 years after the fact. And they asked, because the new state's attorney in that part of Illinois, it was way downstate of Illinois, Pittsburgh, Illinois, the new state's attorney found in the file folder some statement that the mother of the victim would like to talk to the person who did the harm, but it was never followed up on. And she, 20 years later, opened the file folder, saw that, and called out, is there something that can be done? I said, I don't know, but I'll go down and visit. So I went down and I called Tracy, the mother. I said, this is who I am, explained a little bit about it. I go down, I said, can I come and visit you? She says, it's 5 or 6 hours from Chicago. I said, yeah, can I come down and visit you? She said, yeah. So I drove down in a very remote part of Illinois, in a very remote street, in a very darkened house, and I went through the back door because the front door was kind of boarded up, and I sat at a table with Tracy, and we talked. Poured coffee, and we talked, and I asked her at one point in time, why do you want to talk to the person who killed your daughter? And she looked at me, filled with emotion. She said, because I'm so tired of being so angry. I've got to do something. Here was a woman who had suffered so greatly, but suffered alone. Physically, she could hardly get around. Mobility was an issue. Diabetes, hypertension, all the things that we know that trauma has an impact on. But she was alone in all that. No one ever reached out to her. There was no follow-up to the death of her daughter. And so we came together. Ultimately, I went to the prison to talk to the young man, and long story short, we did finally meet. We met in a room adjacent to the courtroom because I needed a place that was not a jail, and they needed a place that was secure. So we agreed that we could be in this conference room adjacent to the courtroom. And so when I got there, I recognized that what we had was an interrogation room with a big metal table, as you know, and the young man, Michael, was shackled to the table and to his waist. In a peacemaking circle, one of the things you do is try to create a safe space, and using a talking piece, you try to create dialogue. And Michael was there with his sister. And I thought, how am I going to do this? But I didn't want to, Tracy wanted to do this, Michael wanted to do this, and so we gathered. And Tracy came in, and we sat down. Tracy's daughter was supposed to be with her, but she couldn't do it. She got ill in the parking lot. And I asked Tracy if she wanted to continue on. She did, and we sat there, and we talked. And there was great emotion. And Michael was in tears, and Tracy engaged him with questions. And she said to him, I cannot forgive you. Not now. But I'm on a new journey. We finished that circle. They took Michael out. Tracy and I left. And we talked along the way. And she says, you know, I'm grateful. I'm grateful that you would accompany me in this. I can't forgive him, but I'm on a new journey, a journey that hopefully will bring me more peace and more reconciliation, my word, not hers. That's what can happen when we intervene, and hopefully earlier on, to really accompany not just the victim, but the one who is incarcerated on their journey and bring them together when it's possible. We had a pilot project with our local judge, and because I'm in court so much, they know who I am, they know who Precious Blood is, they know that we are involved. They know, too, that we're legitimate. You know, one of the problems is that the systems, the courts, the police, the church, they don't really trust the community. They really think the community oftentimes is part of the problem. You know, if you had a good community, a solid community, these things wouldn't happen. So we have to build these relationships with the systems as well so they understand that we're in this for the right reasons. And because I was in court so much, I got to know the judge, and the judge got to know me, got to know Precious Blood. And so we did this pilot project, in which we had to call it a pilot project because, you know, we were doing something a little off kilter. So we did a pilot project, we had the protocol, and we would flag certain cases for the community to be involved and do the restorative justice aspect, and the courts would let go. One of those cases was a young man who was arrested and detained for burglary, Dante. And he was let out on ankle monitor and electronic monitoring. I got a fax that this might be one of those cases, and so I visited Dante and his mom. And we talked. I asked him if this is something that he would want to do. Then I explained what the circle would look like. You're going to be sitting in a circle, in a space at our center, and you're going to sit there with the person whose home you burglarized. Do you want to do this? And he said, yes. And so I left him, and I went to see Mr. Wallace, who is the man whose home was burglarized. Now, he happened to be a police officer. Not the smartest thing that kid did, but I asked Mr. Wallace the same thing, is this something you would want to do? And Mr. Wallace, a good man, said, yes, I do. I want him to know what he did. I want to look at him in his face and see what he feels, what he's thinking. And he didn't do it like he was going to pounce on him. He did it, he just had something that he wanted to share. And so we gathered. We gathered in our center at about 11 o'clock on a Saturday late morning. There was Mr. Wallace. He didn't need anybody. There was Dante and his mom. We had a school principal, retired school principal. We had the coach from the local high school. We had a corner store operator who operated the corner store in that space because he had been through a circle prior for something that happened. And we gathered in that space with some young people because I didn't want Dante to be the only person in that courtroom or in that circle room. And we sat there. And before you get to the issue, you talk about who each other are. So we do these rounds of storytelling. One of the rounds is, who's been a mentor to you? Who's been somebody in your life that really has an impact? And Dante said his mom, that even when he screws up, she's always there for him. And as the talking piece went around, Mr. Wallace said, yeah, my mom too. She's always there. I grew up in a kind of a chaotic household. And this talking piece went around, and people started to lean in. And, in the beginning, they were reticent. And toward the end, they were leaning in with each other, looking at each other in their face. And ultimately, I asked Mr. Wallace, can you tell me what the crime was? Talk about it. And he was so fast to say it had nothing to do with what the courts say. He says, it's not about a broken window. It's not about a stolen computer. I have insurance that's paid for the next day. He said, the crime was I have a 5-year-old. He says, my 5-year-old said to me after this, Daddy, I don't want to live here no more. He said, I vowed that my children would always be safe in their home, that it would be a refuge. And that's what you took from me. And he looked at Dante very directly. Now, the thing about Dante was every time the talking piece came around, there's 2 things that came out of his mouth. One was a deep apology, sincere from his gut apology. The other was he loved basketball. He was crazy about basketball. But he had been expelled from school. And in Chicago, when you're expelled from a Chicago public school, you can't get into a Chicago public school. You got to go to an option school. And so he couldn't play basketball for his school any longer. And frankly, that devastated him. I asked Dante, what happened that you were participant in this thing? And he talked about it. The peer pressure, all the stuff that we hear all the time. But he says, I agreed to finally do it, he says, but, he was the lookout, basically. The others went in, they didn't get caught, he did, so he's been charged. Then I asked Mr. Wallace, what do you need? What's this, in the court's words, what's the sentence? What's the accountability? What are we going to do to make things right? To make Dante pay for what he did? That's the courts. But us, we say, what would help repair the harm? What would make things just a little bit better for you, Mr. Wallace? And he said, I really don't need anything more. He says, I needed to say that to Dante. I needed him to understand. It seems to me he understands very well. And then he went on to say, and he seems to be such a great kid. And his mom, while she was mortified at what he did, loved him very much. And he said, you got all these people who support you. He said, I got what I needed. And then he said, wait a minute, I do need something. He says, I need you, Dante, to go to school. You seem like a great kid. I need you to go to school. And so in Chicago, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And the retired school principal said, I can help him get back into public school. And so his sentence, if you will, was Dante had to go to school. He had to come back, show us his grades, how he was doing. So we wrapped up the circle. Mr. Wallace gets up to go. He leans over to Dante and gives him his card, and he says, look, Dante, I'm not just a cop. I'm also a coach. Let's go hoop it together. Mr. Wallace became the mentor to Dante. Now, I've been to court 1,000 times. I've never seen that. I've never really seen much where the victim is able to say in court that's not a statement of sentencing, to have a say in what the crime was, because the state claims that. This is the crime, and this is the long number we put with that, and we'll call on you when we need you. But in a circle and in restorative justice, it's about having the community and the person who was harmed and the person who did the harm in a safe enough space where people can keep it real and be honest with one another and seek to repair the harm without severing even more so the relationship. The way we do things in the United States in our criminal justice system, it's about punishment. It's about banishment. It's not about healing. Fania Davis, author, activist, says, justice is a healing ground, not a battleground. And so restorative justice allows us to live into that. It's a philosophy. It's a philosophy that we embrace because it carries the spirituality that I believe in. And that's just not a Catholic thing. That's a human thing. A spirituality like Ubuntu, that I'm good only if you're good. It's the interconnectedness that's a part of our lives. And we live in a society that oftentimes has a difficult time with that. You know, one of the challenges, one of the things we need to do, and I'm recognizing time, last story, is we need to change the narrative. You know, I started with Lamont, who was an African-American young man, handsome as hell, but trying to be white to please the courts. We got to change the narrative that young black men are dangerous. You know, we have this thing called, the courts call it Saturday sanction, we call it Saturday engagement. And they know this, but when a kid gets community service, rather than sweeping parking lots, we sit them in a space and say, what are we going to do together? And of course, you give a kid a chance to say what he wants to do together. It's not going to be sweeping the parking lot or painting graffiti. It's going go-kart racing or paintball shooting or movies. And so our program says that we'll gather together and we'll do fun things together. Because the goal of our program is not a clean parking lot. The goal of our program is relationship. There's no better way to be in a relationship with a young man than go paintball shooting with him or go-kart racing with him. And so that's what we did. And I don't usually participate in that. I hear about it. Jonathan usually is the one of our young staff members, usually the one, but he was sick one day, and I said, I could do that. That don't seem too tough. So I gathered together, we're sitting in there, and we talk about it, and they wanted to go to this movie. All right. And it was kind of one of those movies that was early on, so it was showing downtown. So I said, all right. So we go, get in the van, go, about 6 of us. And we're a little early, so we get some food from the McDonald's, the fancy one's got a car in it. You know, and they're thinking, damn, this is not our McDonald's. We're out the neighborhood now. A little bit more time. I said, I can tell you what, there's a sport mart over there. You go over there. We'll kind of hang out there, just see, you know, everybody was into sports. I'll clean up here, and I'll be right behind you. So I clean up around them, and I see them there, and I'm not very far behind them. Sport mart has a glass door, and 6 young black kids come into that space, and all security descends. And I could tell our young people, you know, I love them dearly, but if they don't know you and you approach them a certain kind of way, they're going to say some stuff. And I knew I didn't want to have an incident in downtown Chicago, so I come in hurriedly to let kind of that they're with me. And all of a sudden, this threat, this potential gang problem became a sports team. Because what else would 6 black kids be doing with an old white guy? That rather be, and all things changed. Somehow, some way, in this country, we need to change the narrative. That young people with dreads are not a danger, they're a blessing. And the only way I know of doing that is to get to know them, is to be in proximity. Precious Blood Ministry of Reconciliation intentionally started without being part of a church. I did not want a church because I know what being a pastor of a church can do. All your time is doing things outside of relationships. No offense to it. And I also knew it had to be in a neighborhood where we could be proximate with the people we served. And so we live on the south side of Chicago, and in that south side of Chicago, we interact with young people and families and moms who have lost children to homicide, and we create spaces. It's not just about circle. It's about relationship. It's about walking alongside. It's about saying to this young person, I don't know where we're going, but I'm going with you. And I'm committed to you wherever it is we're going. And so that's restorative justice. Instead of saying, what did you do? What law did you break? We say, what happened to you? And what are we going to do to make it right? And who's going to help us do that? Thank you.
Answer a few questions?
Yep.
Okay. We've got a few minutes for questions. Anybody have questions for Father Kelly? And let's thank him one more time for his excellent speech. Got her. Thank you.
The Obama Center is being built in your neighborhood, I think. Is that right?
A little bit east of us, yes.
But not far.
Right.
Is that going to be helpful to you?
I doubt it.
Tell me why.
Well, I don't know. That's a judgment statement. It's outside of our neighborhood. I don't know how much engagement they're going to do with their community. There's been uproar about displacement already, that people have been displaced from their homes and business has been interrupted because this big center's going in there. So I have my hopes, but they're probably overwhelmed by my doubts. But I don't know enough to be able to answer that very, very much. If they do programming and bring some of the stuff that we heard in that panel into our community and do some real work, then yeah, that would be wonderful.
The resources.
They got them. That's where they put them.
Other questions? Silas?
So I know we've already thanked you, but thank you again so much for coming today. During the panel, Dr. Schroeder talked about that moment of empathy that she gives patients before they get into like the really serious stuff. And I think Mr. Moore kind of echoed that a little bit in their practices. And I'm curious, do we see any hope of that level of empathy being interjected into the criminal justice process, specifically before sentencing or parole or probation, when all a judge has is a sheet on somebody and they have to make a snap decision on how to punish them without any empathy at all?
Yeah, I have hope. I kind of claim that as what I try to do. And we're in the jails doing some restorative work. And so we're trying. In fact, yesterday I got called by the chief judge of Cook County to see what we were doing to help with doing restorative justice in juvenile detention center. But so many people think of restorative justice as a program and not a philosophy. And so really restorative justice is about, I'm committed to our relationship because I can't be fully human until you are. And that's a relationship that's hard to kind of seep into criminal justice, where we seem to each other so much. But I'm hopeful that we can do this, and we did this, we trained the Illinois judges. There was about 80 or 90 judges, and we did a talk, and then they sat in a circle. And in that space, they were able to talk about the stresses and strains of being a judge. And it was eye-opening to me. I really began to empathize with them because of their job. And it allowed them to experience this space, and they weren't coming in as judges, but they're coming in as Terrence and, Jamil or whatever. And they sat in those spaces, they began to build relationships with each other and talk about some of the stresses and strains they had. And then we talked about how that could be a process that we'd utilize amongst people both inside and outside of the criminal justice system. So I'm hopeful that things like that, little experiences like that, can make a difference. It's kind of why I come to places like this, because with the hopes that maybe something somebody says makes somebody go home and say, damn, we're going to do something different, because this ain't working.
That was a law student in my class talking about empathy. You
Good
got
job.
an A.
I echo thanks. And one of the things you talked about a lot was accompanying people. I come from a background working with refugees in different humanitarian contexts around the world. And in the organization I've served with for over a decade, we talk about accompaniment being really important. So thank you for talking about accompaniment as being transformative. My question for you is, how do you scale accompaniment? How do we make more of you, and how do we embed that into programming?
I think it's people like the panel we had before, people who have knowledge and experience and a passion to be able to then replicate that into various communities. I think that's the accompaniment that I see. There's a center, Taller de San Jose in Chicago, and their whole thing is about accompaniment. It doesn't, whatever your issue is, they're just going to walk with you through it because of the bureaucracy and things that are happening in our country where people want services, but it's so bureaucratic and so difficult. And you get on a recorded voice line and all those kinds of things. Their job is to say, hey, let's just go. Let's work together. And I think somehow, some way, and you do that when you know the person. Think about your own children. You'll go to hell and back to accompany them because you love them. And I think ultimately, that's what we have to get to, that kind of level of being in relationship with one another. David Brooks, the famed author, New York Times person, he told a story about, he said he had a good friend who's been in child development all his life, a renowned child development person. And David Brooks then asked him, what program really works? What's one of those programs that really works? And he looks at David Brooks and he says, the only thing I know that really works is when somebody feels love, when somebody loves them. And all research tells us that if somebody knows that they have one person, just takes one adult, that has their back, that they can count on, that their resilience is that much more. I might not be able to stop racism. I might not be able to stop what we do to our criminalizing young people, but I certainly can accompany them. And I certainly can hopefully let them know that I got their back. And that, I think, is what I can offer our young people and our families and our community. And hopefully we can do more of that.
Thank you. This is more a comment than a question, just because I'm resonating with what you're talking about in terms of, I'm with Milwaukee Public Schools, and restorative practices or restorative justice being looked at as like a separate program or service we're providing versus having an institution that's informed by restorative practice. And that's what I hear. I think that's why we're gathered, right? Is like, this is what we want to see in the legal system. This is what the medical system is attempting to do in their space. And so as we advocate for public schools as well, please keep that in mind, that we need community members to state that we need schools to be informed by restorative practice, not just associated with discipline procedures, but like how we operate and what we believe, what is our philosophy with children. Because again, being informed by restorative practice is how the brain and the body operates, and where we can get to those deeper spaces.
Thank you, yes, I agree.
Just a quick comment too. We have a collaboration going with several Milwaukee Public Schools, some of whom Joanna brought here today, and I think we'll see some more this afternoon. But engaging our law students with high school students and then high school students with law students in circles, both here at the law school and then when we go to visit them at their own high school. So working together to try to share information and create those cultures of restorative practices. One more? One more.
Thank you. Thank you for everything that you do. It's very moving. I'm curious if you have any commentary about, like, it's amazing that you're outside of the church and doing this work in the community. Now, what have you taken back to the church, and how has your work influenced Chicago Archdiocese, the Vatican?
Talk about bureaucracy.
Don't be humble.
First of all, I'm not outside the church, just because this is being taped. No, I'm still very much, they ask me sometimes, are you a real priest? I say, yes. So I'm not outside the church, and I believe this is the church. See, it's not in a sanctuary, it's not in a building, this is the church. Because ultimately, we're trying to build the beloved community, right? Ultimately, we're trying to be in communion with one another in church language, and I think that's what we're trying to do. And so I think that these experiences, like I've shared about judges, similarly, we've done that within the church. But I gotta say, the church is less inclined sometimes to take us up on this. I think they're less inclined to see their problem, our problem. And they need to be a little bit more willing to say, we got issues. And start to work on it internally as well as their parish. I know too many parishes that these young people that I talk about are a problem to them. And, we had a thing where we ran from the Archdiocese, and they messed up our basketball court when they were moving the church, all this kind of stuff. Anyhow, I said we wanted a basketball court. I fought that a while. Finally, they relented and said, we'll build a basketball court, but they demanded to have a fence put around it. And this guy from the Archdiocese who drove in a BMW from downtown said, you know, Father, you got to get in the real world. You're going to have a lot of gang kids around this basketball court. I said, that's the point. That's the mission. That's what we want to do. So we have a lot of work.
Just a quick comment about judges, because there's several in the room. There are several in this room, and several retired judges as well. But there is, Chief Judge Carl Ashley is the chair of the Race, Equity, and Procedural Justice Committee. They are doing a conference at the courthouse right now. We did not compare notes, unfortunately, but some judges did show up here today and are listening, and I know those judges here have the heart to do more restorative practices, and so I'm grateful that they're here today as well. With that, let's thank Father Kelly one more time. Awesome, awesome. All right. So we're entering into our afternoon stage of our conference, and we've heard a lot about gun violence. We've heard from Dr. Kostelac about the statistics of gun violence, and then she touched upon some of the things that are going on in community, the positive things, the things that give us hope for our community and the prevention of gun violence. We had a wonderful panel discussion with people at Fredericton and the Medical College, and we also certainly heard from Father David Kelly, who talked about his work on the south side of Chicago, actually using restorative justice practices in place to connect with youth to reduce the incident of gun violence and other kinds of violence. And part of this conference, particularly this panel, is dedicated to the street outreach efforts going on in Milwaukee County. Programs such as 411 for Life, Project Ujima, Credible Messengers, and Promise Keepers have really become pivotal in the fight against violence. And they do demonstrate the power of the outreach efforts that are going on to make a difference. And so I am very excited and happy to have the leadership team here for all these wonderful programs. And I'm going to introduce, they're not in the order on my script here, so we'll go out of order a little bit. But I'm going to introduce them, and then I have some questions for them, and then I'm going to ask you again if you have questions for them so that they can share with us the power of their programs. And so on my left is Lynn Lewis, the director of 411 for Life at the Medical College of Wisconsin. Clap. And next to her, on her right, is Regina Wai, deputy. Here's a long one for you, because she's wearing 3 different hats right now. Deputy Administrator, Children, Youth, and Family Services, Credible Messenger Program, Department of Health and Human Services in Milwaukee County. Next to her is Ingrid Campbell, Restorative Practice Program Manager, Children's Wisconsin Project Ujima. Next to her, Quinn Taylor, Violence Prevention Program Coordinator, City of Milwaukee, Office of Community Wellness and Safety. And one of the stars of our film, he's shaking his head, James Price, 411 for Life Violence Interrupter. Welcome, all of you. Thank you. So we're just going to go down the list here, and I'm going to ask each one of them to describe their program that they are leading and what are its key components. So let's start with you, Lynn.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Lynn Lewis again, Director for 411 for Life. So what is 411 for Life? 411 for Life is a violence prevention program, right? So we take the same lens of using that, seeing gun violence as a public health concern, right? Using 3 key components of gun violence, right? Looking at detection and interruption, looking at targeting, looking at how we change community norms or attitudes about what gun violence looks like, right? How we do the work is through 4 major components of the program. So we have the hospital component, right? We have our hospital responders that respond to victims impacted by gun violence through Frater Hospital, which you've heard a lot about early from Dr. Libby. We are most recently are also in Aurora Sinai. We are also in St. Joseph's Hospital. And then we have our community team that consists of our violence interrupters, our outreach workers, and then we have a community engagement worker that also coordinates different events in the community to demonstrate and show who we are and what we do and be resources to the community. We are also a program of Office of Wellness and Community Safety. We are also in collaboration and employees of Medical College of Wisconsin in partnership with Frater Hospital and Milwaukee County Credible Messengers. So that's just a snippet of what we do, and thank you. I'm looking forward to answering more questions about 414 Life.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone, and thanks, Judge T, for the opportunity to be on the panel. I'm going to be talking about 2 of Milwaukee County's Community Values Intervention Initiative. The first one is Credible Messenger, and I know that we heard that earlier. Some folks was using that, and so I just want to kind of share what a Credible Messenger is. It's an individual with shared lived experience who have went through transformation and have demonstrated positive change in their life, who's committed to giving back to their community, that can connect with the youth and the young people that we're working with. So that is a credible messenger. They have respect in their community, and they're credible in their community. And so Milwaukee County Credible Messenger Program is a collective of 6 agencies. We have 6 agencies that we work with. Lynn said 414 for Life, West Care, Wisconsin, the Milwaukee Christian Center, GLOW, 414, Youth Advocate Program, and who am I missing? No, I said Milwaukee Christian Center.
It'll come to you.
Running Rebels. Thank you. I have to keep up with all these agencies. And so collectively, that makes up our Credible Messenger program, and we provide transformative mentoring to youth in the community as well as youth that are in the youth justice system. Our key components are, again, transformative mentoring, but then we also do mediation, conflict resolution, we do community events. We just recently had one, our Purpose and Power Summit, which was a gathering of over 80 young men who got up early on a Saturday morning and came out. And so that was a powerful summit that we had. And so that's under our umbrella of Healing for Our Youth. But back to our key components along with the mentoring, we also have part of our framework is the trauma response team. And so when our credible messengers, and so when they're connecting with families, they have the opportunity when they're there to be able to connect them directly or do a warm handoff to our trauma response team if there's any young person from the age of 6 to 17 that has experienced trauma. We also have our housing service as part of our framework as well. And there what we're doing is we are connecting individuals and families who have been impacted by community violence in emergency housing, and then we also work with them to find long-term housing as well. And so those families sometimes also want to go back to their home, to their community. We work with them as well as creating a safety plan for them to return safely to their home. We also have our collective partners with the Office of Wellness and Community Safety that we work closely with in our CVI efforts as well. We also have a restorative practice part of the work that we do as well when we're doing mediations and conflict resolutions, but we also thread that throughout all of our programming. And so when the credible messengers are meeting one-on-one with their youth, they're having those conversations about empathy. They're teaching them how to build it. They're teaching them about reconciling the harm and repairing the harm that they have done in the community. Our other initiative that I'm happy to announce is our Advanced Peace. We will be launching that next week, and I would like to extend an invitation to everyone for a press conference on that, October 29th, noon, at the Milwaukee Christian Center. But this is a program that's going to be working directly with the individuals that's driving this gun violence in the community. An Advanced Peace model is a 7-point touch system that will be working with youth and young folks and investing in their development, their well-being and health. And so with the 7 touch points, they'll be working with either a neighborhood change agent or a peacekeeper. And so those 7 touch points is that they'll be working with them to create a life map, and basically that's kind of a goal on how they want to see their life. They'll also be doing daily check-ins with them. There'll be an elder circle, and the elder circle will be made up of elders in our community as well as others who have shared experience, and they'll be telling them and teaching them about restorative practice. And so again, we're weaving that into that as well. There'll be an opportunity for them to have internship opportunity. There'll be transformative travel as well. We'll be connecting them to the social service needs that they have in order to be able to meet their basic needs. And then we'll also be providing them with incentives. And so we are, again, helping them to be able to transition from that gun violence and what's driving that to be able to live productively and healthy in the community. And so those are 2 of our main CVI initiatives with Milwaukee County.
Hello again. My name is Ingrid Campbell with Children's Project Ujima. I am the program manager for Restorative Practices. A little background on Project Ujima. Project Ujima is an intervention program that is it's a hospital-based program through the emergency room at Children's. So when a child comes into the emergency room that's been impacted by some type of trauma, recently, it's either a gunshot victim or maybe a car accident from like a stolen car or something like that, they alert Project Ujima. Project Ujima comes to the hospital, and they essentially provide it's similar to like a wraparound program where they wrap services around not only the child but the family to restore the harm or restore them back to where they were before the harm took place. The emergency room was seeing like a rise of kids coming through their department with some type of trauma, especially with COVID going on. So to prevent this from happening, they decided we need to put something in place to prevent the harm that's taking place, which is where I come into place with restorative practices. So I go into schools that have a children partnership already. Typically, it's a nurse that's in the school through Children's Hospital. And I work with different classrooms on restorative practices, and I also work with after-school programs with restorative practices. And we sit in circle, and we work on ways that they can resolve conflicts in a peaceful way, using their words instead of resorting to any type of violence, because the ultimate goal is to reduce the need for Project Ujima and eventually put Project Ujima out of business, because everyone's using their words. That's the ideal goal of the program.
Hello, everyone. My name is Quinn Taylor, again, with the City of Milwaukee, Office of Community Wellness and Safety. I'll try to be brief, but as you already can see, there's a lot that goes into the dedication and the involvement in reducing violence in the City of Milwaukee. So a lot of what you already heard is very complex. It requires a lot of different levels of coordination and understanding to really do this work effectively. A little bit about OCWS, Office of Community Wellness and Safety. So my role is within the community division. I oversee our Promise Keepers. We have 12 different Promise Keeper teams. And these Promise Keepers focus their violence prevention efforts within our Promise Zone. So there's 4 different Promise Zones in the City of Milwaukee that we've identified as the areas where violence, regardless of the homicide rate, these areas still see a high level of violence. That's Old North Milwaukee, Washington Park, Harambe, and North Division. and the near south side, including Walker's Point. With those promise keepers, those trusted messengers, they work with Forum for Life, they work with the county in creating relationships and expanding relationships to really get the resources out to the community. We use our credible messengers, our promise keepers, Forum for Life to address issues in the community. To give you a quick example, today there's a community response that was activated last night because of some violence that occurred on the south side. So this is a coordination of the county, of the city, of Forum for Life, of all these agencies coming together, identifying an area where there's been an uptick in violence and pouring resources in that area. So whenever a community response is activated, it automatically activates a continued response. So we identify what resources through our assessment can be provided to this area, whether that's the Alert Neighbor Program, establishing block clubs to have regular meetings to talk about what's happening in the community. With the Alert Neighbor, you get a Ring doorbell and floodlights. Whether that's youth programs, a Forum for Life comes in and establish and identify community-based organizations that they're either partnering with or can partner with to extend resources and, before and after school programs. There's quite a few schools that Forum for Life is in already. We have 3 different divisions at OCWS. We have family, community, and recast. We recently just changed the name. Last year, we were called the Office of Violence Prevention. And although with the name change, it doesn't mean that that still isn't our focus, but we really wanted to be known for the investments and the commitment that we make to communities, reestablishing and stabilizing blocks. For a setting like this, normally I'm cool in most situations. I can be out on the block dealing with some guys, mediating the situation. Guns can be involved, and I'm cool. A lot of the work that I do have been behind the scenes. This is the first time where I have to do this level of work and be out front in the public. So even though a lot of these situations is nerve-wracking, I understand the responsibility that we have in educating community and educating organizations on the work, the necessity of this work, how do we sustain this work, and really make the investments in the community to create change.
Hey everybody, I'm with MCW Medical College of Wisconsin and also Forum for Life. I'm a violence interrupter. The work that what we do is we see violence really at the most high level is probably that you can experience it. And we are mediators and de-escalators. It's almost like when we in them areas, we're called out there to try to put the fire out and stop levels of retaliation from someone that is whether fatal or non-fatal shooting, so that the act of violence don't continue to be a perpetuated cycle of violence after the first incident. So we try to get in there and mediate the situation to try to see if is it something that I can do? Do I have to call someone from MCC or Promise Keepers? And it's about inroads and how you gather information and how we mediate things. And one thing that I would say about the work and about me as being a VI, if I'm not relatable in these communities, then my credibility is shot. If I can't relate with you or empathize with you, I can't mediate with you, I can't de-escalate, you're gonna look at me like, what are you doing here? And it ain't just me, it ain't just even that point, it's the outreach on it too. It's the pull-up game after that. Well, who do I have to talk to on the other end? So we even have our outreach component to it, whereas they might need housing or levels of relocation. And that's where county and Office of Community Wellness and Safety. We might have to relocate them. They might can't stay in that area, you know. I'm dealing with 2 situations like that right now, and it is frustrating, you know, but I want the best to happen to anybody. Like, you know, when it comes to this work, it's frustrating, it's humbling, and it makes you think about, like, if you had, where would this city would have been like 30 years ago if we had this, what we have right now? Like, we could have built on this then, you know, but, you know, and that's pretty much all I got. I'm just waiting on y'all questions.
Nah. I still have some for you.
All right.
That's okay. You hang on to it. I know, I do that to you every time. It's okay. I appreciate your response. Everyone's responses. Thank you for sharing with us the components and what you do in general. Can we take it in a different direction, and can you actually share a story or two? James, I know you have a few that might describe one of your program's most rewarding moments. I know Father Kelly shared with us some stories, right? And that resonates with people in a way that I think helps more than just talking about the components of your program. So if you have something and everyone's willing to share, please share.
All right, I'll share a moment who we probably are all familiar with. Probably about a month and a half ago, it was a situation of a 63-year-old that was, that they say allegedly was jumped on by some kids. And, well, ain't no alleged, it happened. And it was big social media stuff that a race war and all this stuff could happen or could pop off. But I ended up having a relationship with the father of the man who was assaulted. But it was actually 3 people. But how they put it, it was only 1. So it took me to talk to the son because, yes, he was on, like, in the community, you would hear, like, that type of time. But he wanted, like, I wouldn't say revenge, but he wanted, like, someone to be held accountable for this, for what the act that happened to not only his father, but his 2 uncles. So my relationship where it come in, and I don't want to be the one to take all the credit because my team, like back there, and 414 Life, I would say, Promise Keepers, we all coordinated a plan where we all worked this, like, in unison together. And my thing was, like, I had a personal relationship with him, so I was able to get in and really, really talk to him and remind him, like, you know this is still a child, right? You know this is a kid, right? And as an adult, like, how would that, it's almost like you got to draw on the energy that you're getting, and I had to, like, read the situation. You know it's just a kid, right?
James, can you just put the mic
Oh,
on?
I'm sorry.
There you go.
I think I'm loud enough, though, right? Can y'all hear me, though, when I had it? But, like, my motivation was, you know, it was a kid. And as an adult, you can't be running around whooping on kids, so I had to, you know, see where he was at mentally, and he was like, bro, I ain't on that. I just want justice for what happened to my dad. And I was like, look, it's only 2 ways that we can really look at this. You have one of the most diverse barbershops in the city, and you give people that's coming home from prison a chance to be able to cut hair in your shop and get a job and to be able to, like, move and push forward. I'm not telling you not to feel the way you feel about your dad. And yes, you will get answers, but there's always another angle on how we can get answers and come to a resolution about the problem, you know, about what happened. And I don't, like, want to, like, elaborate a little bit more on it, but I would say, like, where he was at with it is like me literally having to sit there and walk every step of the process with him. And he's been a close friend of mine. It's like, I was a kid and I looked up to this guy. You know what I'm saying? And to see him build a brand and do what he doing and didn't want retaliation behind it. All he said was, I just want justice, but in the form of them kids get the help that they need to get so that they don't impose this on someone else.
James, real quick, in the film, you suggest that you've had experiences with restorative justice. And you and I, after the film, talked a little bit about your use of restorative practices when you go into community. How has your experiences with restorative justice helped you navigate some of these conflicts?
I would say empathizing. If you can't empathize in this work, you can't be relatable. And that's big because if you can't see something through the lens of them, how can you relate? They're not gonna feel you. It's like, I would say I learned that in the restorative justice group, but they always tell me, you got empathy. You got sympathy, but you know what sympathy is, but can you empathize with someone? And I used to always get sympathy and empathy mixed up. Oh, you can have empathy, but can you empathize? Can you see it the way a victim sees, what they, like, can you see it through their lens? I was able to understand that I can't feel what you feeling, but I can see everything in the lens of how you seeing it and how it took place. And I have incorporated that when I'm out here in the communities and I work with people. Because in some situations, you don't have to say nothing. They just want you to listen to them.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Quinn, you want to share one?
Yeah, and I appreciate the question also, and the work that we do, working with different families and individuals, there's so many stories that we can look back on or situations or incidents to where, we assisted a family or individual, thought we had a resolution, and that cycle of violence continues. The trauma of living in a community that's riddled with violence, with systemic racism, and you name it. It takes a lot to pour into support. So through data, we can show numbers of families that we worked with, and we got them out this situation. We provided housing here, but you really don't get the backstory of what it really took. I started this job officially last year in April. Started working with a family in June. There was a shooting that happened over on Titania and Capitol. There was a 1-year-old, so it was a domestic violence situation. A 1-year-old was shot and killed, and she died a week before her birthday. We did a community response the next day. Then call the news, then alert MPD. We didn't have our community response as a collaboration and coordination yet in place. It was just me and some Promise Keepers went out there. Somehow the news got a hold of it. Did a short interview. I hate doing interviews with the news, especially on situations of that magnitude, but did the interview. And then I assigned some Promise Keepers to reach out to the family. So we have what's called a Telegram group where we have 50 Promise Keepers, a total of 50 of them. They're all in this Telegram group, and that's where we can do real-time information. But I was doing an update. I wanted to get information on what was the outreach, how did it look like, what type of connection was made. And this individual, I'll be transparent, this Promise Keeper who was supposedly had a relationship with his family said, yep, I reached out to the family. They said they don't need any resources and they'll reach out to us if they need something. This was 2 days after they just lost a 1-year-old, a week before the birthday. You can't ask a mother, what do you need in this situation? Who knows what you need? But what you can do is provide some resources. You can let her know what we have available. Like Compton said, you can empathize with that mother and offer some solutions. So, they said that. I tried to call, and then I said, let me reach out myself. So I called the mom, didn't get an answer, pulled up to the house, knocked on the door, nobody was home, I left a voicemail. The mother called me back later on that evening and said, you were the guy on the news. She was like, she said, from your interview, I can tell that you really cared. So she got to telling me the story, what happened, how they tried, the individual that's now locked up for the murder, was chasing them, and, she was getting all into the details. I said, listen, I don't want to hear none of that. We can get to that later. I want to know how you're doing. Matter of fact, I want to provide you a hotel. I want to get you and your kids away just so you can get some rest. Like, really empathizing, understanding what that family is going through. So we set them up a hotel, talked with her, late throughout the night, the next day, and she was like, my daughter's birthday is in 6 days. We already ordered a cake. What can we do? I said, do you still want to have the party? She said, yes. I said, well, let's have her a birthday party. And we'll do a community birthday party. We'll honor every family that lost a child due to gun violence. And we did one of the biggest, most amazing birthday parties in a park close by where this kid lost their life. We had horses, we had face painting, we had everything. Then a family wanted to relocate. They were afraid of retaliation. We were able to get them housing for about a week, but that was it. Every route that we went to try to get them in permanent housing, there was a barrier, either because of an eviction on the record, because of their background. But I continue to work with this family. I continue to talk to this family as they were going from house to house, giving them whatever type of support I can. It wasn't until November of that year that we were able to find housing and permanent housing for that family. So I say all of that just to show the level of involvement and commitment that we have. And that's only one. That's only one family. From that point, from April to when I started to November, in that time frame, it's probably 100 families that I was dealing with and working with, and a lot of them to that level. These individuals that deal with this amount of trauma, they become your family also. You have to manage your personal life, what you're dealing with, kids, school, and also be able to console, be there, be available. When people call, they want you to answer the phone. They don't want to be calling you and you not available. So being able to be available, but also tapping in with the resources. I'm so thankful for Hannah, and usually she would be at a convening like this, but Hannah works for the county, and me and Hannah worked day and night to find this family housing until we were able to find them housing. We don't stop at a closed door. We don't stop at a no. We continue to push on until we get that yes.
Thank you. Quinn, thank you for sharing that story as well. Thank you, Ingrid.
Yes, I would say through my work with, especially one of the groups that I work with, COA, Golden After School Program, the kids that come through that after school program are provided a safe space from like 4 o'clock when they get out of school until 9 or 10 o'clock, 6 days a week. Initially, when I came in, people, or the kids, saw Children's Hospital, and I didn't know that there was a distrust with Children's Hospital because they've had negative experiences, or because Child Protective Services is also connected to that. So some of the kids did not want to talk to me because they were afraid they may share something and then I would report it or things like that. So I had to build community with the kids. I had to build the trust with them. And eventually it worked. About 1.5 years later, I have trust with them, and they know that I'm really there. I have to show up and be there, and they know that I'm sincere in everything that I say or do with them. Most recently, I can think of a situation where someone was at school, and it was the beginning of the school year. For whatever reason, kids were fighting, I guess, over stuff that took place. And one of the girls, that was actually one of the tougher girls I had been working with, she said she chose not to fight because she heard me. She said, all I could hear was you, meh, 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 meh. And I'm like, okay, I'll take it. And she said, I could hear you saying, that's not restorative. Who cares what somebody says? Those are just words. You can't change what somebody says. You can't control. All you can do is control your own actions and how you respond to a situation. And there's another child that he's 16 and he's the man of the house, caring for younger siblings. He's the parent, I should say, of the house, caring for younger siblings. He was heavily involved in gangs, shootouts and things like that. And now, again, because he knows he can't control others around him, but he can control himself, and he wants to be better for his siblings, he has removed himself from the circle he was normally with. So when they call and they say, hey, let's do this, let's do that, he'll push back. He's not involved with them anymore. So I count those as wins.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Ingrid. So I'm going to tell a story about one of my young men. And let me just give a little context about Children, Youth, and Family Services. We oversee youth justice, the detention center, as well as children disability service. And so in one of my roles that Judge T talked about, I work closely with our providers that provide services. And so I had some young men that was at our RTC, and sometimes I would go and I would bring them breakfast from McDonald's. And so on this morning I had stopped by, and so there was a couple of young men that I hadn't met yet. And so they were talking, and so I was listening, and I'm listening, and they were talking about this one young man that they call Little Jimmy. And so I'm listening, and I was like, this sounds like one of my young men, but I call him James. And so I'm listening, and so there was going to be a threat of some retaliation involving him. And so they was describing him, and I was like, I think this is my young man. And so he happened to be serving some sanction days, and I like the term that Father Kelly had used before, engagement. And so I had went to the detention center to see him. And when they brought him into the visiting room, he sat down, and I said, how you doing, little Jimmy? And when I said that, he immediately just dropped his head. And I said, we're going to have a conversation. He said, I know, Miss Gina, we're getting ready to have a CCC, which is a critical, crucial conversation. And so the kids say CCC when they know I need to have a conversation with them. And I said, yeah, we need to have a conversation, but it's not going to be about you. It's going to be about me. It's going to sound selfish, but it's going to be about me. And so I told him, I said, I value your life. I care for you. I do not want anyone calling me, asking me what size Rest in Peace t-shirt that I need. I need for you to stay alive. And so we started talking. And so, and I said, I know, this is typical. You get hit, you want your leg back. I said, but it has to end. It has to end. And so we started having that conversation about him valuing his life. And we talked about, what it is that he wanted out of life. And I remember, I asked him, I was like, you're doing good things. He's artistic. He could take tennis shoes and he can hand paint them. And so we had even talked about at that time in I'm ashamed to say, I was calling it Instacart, but it was Instagram. How we could put this on Instacart, and you can, you don't even have to worry about marketing. And, and so we had this conversation, and so I watched him. I watched him and I listened. And I was checking in on him when he was released from detention. And he did not. He did not go back, and he did not retaliate. And to this day, we check in from time to time. But I tell my young people, I'm very selfish in this relationship because I need you to stay alive.
Just pause 1 second. Gina, you and I talked about the advanced peace model and the use of elder circles to bring youth together with elders. And it sounds like that's sort of the model you use, but you're one-on-one with them. What excites you about this advanced peace model now that you're bringing on board?
I think that's one of the components is the elder circles. And for me, growing up, we had elders in our community. Certainly, like when the lights was off, like the elders was telling us it's time to get home. And so I think just kind of bringing that back to where we have a community and understanding that community is not about building, it's about people and people supporting people. And so I'm really excited about that we'll be able to work with these individuals that's driving gun violence in the community and be able to make this investment. And we're going to be calling them fellows to be able to give them the tools and resources that they need to be able to transition from this life, whether it be driven by survival or just trying to chase clout. And so I'm really excited about the 7 touch points that we'll be able to offer them.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing.
So success stories, there are so many. I call them wins because we have a team of 17, right? For the hospital side and the community side. And I just want to level set before I move into the success story about the work that this team does. Our hospital team alone from May of this year through September had 150 referrals, meaning they touched 150 victims and families who were impacted by gun violence through one of the hospitals, right? And then we have our community team. Almost every month this summer, they receive on average 50 referrals from the community, from the Office of Community Wellness and Safety for us to respond because there is a safety or retaliation type situation, right? So that's 150 plus 50, our team is busy, right? And I tell my team all the time, I have 20 plus years in the field of doing direct work, pulling up on patients and participants that I work with, attending funerals, planning funerals, consoling parents, 20 plus years. So although I'm not in the direct work of things, I'm hearing almost daily from 17 people on how gun violence, retaliation is impacting them, how they have to move in the streets, how they have to show up for families. So although I'm not directly in it, I take all of their stories, all of their emotions, right? How they show up for their families, how they show up for their participants as wins. It's so important. Each day, right, they're drowning in hearing the stories and how they have to pull up to houses and how the resources that they have to scrounge to find because there are gaps on how we do continuum of care for our families, but we try to make it work. But I want to move into a success story that I want to share from one of our outreach workers, Amir. Is he in here with us still?
Stand up, Amir.
So Amir was working with a 16-year-old male, but prior to Amir working with the 16-year-old male, this individual was shot last year at the age of 16. He was shot once. His friend was shot several times. This particular person was engaged or part of a pain-based group, and I don't know how many of you know about pain-based groups, but pain-based groups is a vicious cycle, right? It's when young people pay homage to one of their friends who were killed or murdered, right? But they also want to get back because they're angry. They don't know what to do with this pain. They don't know what to do with it, but what they can do is retaliate. We're going to get back, right? So then they get back on the person or the group of people who killed their friend. And then now that group is paying homage to their friend. And now it's a vicious cycle. Whoever kills my friend, I'm taking yours. So now we have this pain-based groups, which are young people who don't know how to handle grief, know how to handle harm, which is so important for restorative practice, and how our team pulls up and have those mediations and interruptions, not only in the streets, but in the detention centers and in the schools, right? So getting back to Amir's participant, this person survived, right? Was charged with a felony. I think it was recklessly endangering safety, right? A year later, this same person got shot again, along with another friend, At this point, Amir gets the referral and is engaging with this young person, right? That you're talking about a component of the program for 414 Life is changing the norms around gun violence, right? Changing the attitude, changing your behaviors, and knowing that you can do different and choose different, right? But we also know that it takes credible people. It takes people who care. It takes people who have social capital and can tap into that youth's best self and interest, and that's exactly what Amir did, right? So this person is now 17. He is in driver's ed trying to get his license. He is working. This young person never went to school. He is going to school, right? And that's a big deal. Like, that's a win. And for 414 Life and the team there, that's a success. We take the small wins and we'll call it a success in a minute, because that's huge, right? And so Amir continues to work with this young person. He is engaged with different conferences that are happening in the city. This young person comes to our Friday night teen night at our location on Lisbon. And so he's really showing up. He's really understanding that his life is valued. He's really tapping into his self and finding out what his interests are and what his worth is within his family, within his community, and it's through the help of that relationship and that rapport that Amir has built with them. So really excited about that success.
Thank you all for sharing those success stories, those wins. Right, Lynn? Win for Lynn. Questions from the audience? Oh, we have one down here already.
Maybe you can just hear me.
We'll give you the microphone.
What are we doing as a community to get guns off the streets? I haven't heard anyone talk about it. It's not your area?
Well, I mean, it is and it isn't, right? We all want guns off the streets, but these individuals are attacking it in a different way.
I understand
but
that.
Certainly supporting that.
But any of you involved in getting in that piece of it?
I'll say something about it. It's almost like when you engage in someone that has a firearm, I think the last thing is you want to ask them is you want to say to them is, hey, I think you need to get rid of that. So it's a different, and I'm not saying that anything is wrong about the statement that you made, but when we meet people where they at, you got to meet them where they at, and then the work starts. That it gets to the point whereas they don't want to have a firearm on them. I think it's like we got to baby step it, because just asking someone in a community, like they take offense to, do you own a firearm? Man, you police or something? What you doing asking me about a firearm? I wouldn't be here making this statement or be able to tell this story right now. So we dealing with a lot of mental health when it comes to these people that's possessing these firearms. So it's always like, yes, we would agree. Please take the firearms. But once you able to educate someone about the firearm that they have, they might think different. Hey, that switch you got on your gun, do you know how much time it is for that? What you got, a 50-round drum on that? How old is you, brother? Oh, you 16? Oh, you know that's a what? And you start giving them numbers, you got 40 years in you? That's the prevention. Then it's, oh man, I don't know if I want to get caught. You 18? You ever have go register it. You know, it's different approaches to take about it, and some of the youth that carry, most of them, I would say don't carry, but if they do have it on their person, they ain't gonna let you know. But our approach is, I'm not judging you because of that. What that's telling me is that you have a lot of things going on in your life right now that you need this on you. And so the next question will be, how can we work on disarming that from you? Yeah. So it's a step process.
Good answer.
And then I'll piggyback a little bit off of Compton. I've been a part of gun buyback programs way back in, I believe, 2009 with, at the time, Alderman McGee Jr. And you can say whether it was successful or not. A lot of the guns that you get through gun buyback programs be guns that either don't work, or so antique, that it would be a danger to yourself to even use. One of the things that we really focus on is gun education, gun safety trainings. I think the real question is, why is guns so accessible to certain communities in Milwaukee? We have 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds that has semi-automatic weapons, and we don't make guns. We're not shipping them in. But I think, we need to look at it a little different. Where are these guns coming from? How are they getting on the streets? How are they getting in these communities and in these hands of these young people? What we're doing on the back end is trying to make sure that if you do have it, let's educate you on a little bit of the consequences of having that gun and committing this crime with it. And just trying to educate communities on best practices of how do you store your firearm? How do you prevent your firearm from getting stolen in your car? We know we have open carry and concealed carry. A lot of guns is getting on the streets. I don't know if I would say a lot, but a large number through car break-ins. You have individuals that'll go to the Bucks game or to a event downtown, and you can't take your firearm in these places, and you're legally possessing the firearm, but you have to leave it in your car under your seat, or you have to leave it in your glove compartment. Criminals know these things. So how can we invest in our communities? How can we educate the community to better secure firearms, whether it's in your house, whether it's in your home? And then again, trying to address that root cause of where all these guns coming from and how are they ending up in these communities.
Gina?
And I just want to share that, with the Credible Messenger, we believe in the power of engagement in those trusted relationships. And we have had a lot of kids had come to their Credible Messengers, and mysteriously they just found this gun somewhere that they just want to give to them. And so we know that's big for them, because we know that they're giving up their gun and they're in that space right there in their life where they have trusted people around them and supporting them. And so we use the power of engagement, education, and trusted relationship.
Yeah, I just want to add to Gina, Quinn, and Compton regarding education is key. I know for 414 Life, any pop-up that we do in a community, events that we have, we always have gun locks. We will educate you. We will not question who's coming to the table to get one, right? Because the real work is when you have that relationship, to have that real talk, to say, hey, like Compton mentioned, what are the consequences behind you carrying this, right? And two, we have to understand why they're carrying it. For some people, it's a real threat. For some young people and people in general, it's a real threat for them in their community or things that has happened to them. There's something in them that feels they have to be protected, right? And so until we can engage and build that rapport and trust, then we can start talking about, hey, let's leave this and have some options for them, right? But out the gate to say, hey, you shouldn't have that, we lost them right there. So education and then building that rapport is key.
This is a question for Quinn. Quinn, my name is Ellen Brostrom, and up until May 3, I was a Milwaukee County Circuit Court judge, and I had the trial of the baby you were just describing. And I was really heartened to hear all of the things that you guys did for them. And as you can imagine, when they went through the court process, they were unbelievably traumatized. And they were still unbelievably traumatized at the very last hearing I had with them, which was a restitution hearing. And I'm curious your impression about the ways in which the criminal justice system served them well and did not serve them well. And I'm not here for you to, I'm not looking for compliments, be as honest as you want to be, because I've really come to question the efficacy of our prison system as a way to deal with violence and victimization and harm. So
I appreciate the question, and I appreciate the work that you do, and how you assist the family as well. I talked with them many nights while they were going through trial. There's times where they wanted me to be there, and I was unable to. That's the hard part. I was actually dealing with a personal situation myself during that time. My daughter, who at the time was 13 years old, she was home from school, and mom had just left to get some donuts for her little brother, and there was a break-in. Mom sees this individual go in the house on the Ring doorbell camera, and then I get a phone call, somebody's in the house, and my baby's there. So I just explained to this family, I understand what you're going through because I'm going through some things similar. Thank God that, because of the quick action of law enforcement, that they were able to apprehend this individual before he was able to harm my daughter. Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Yep. But those are some of the things that we deal with on the front line and still have to go before our community, stand strong, and be a support system for them as well. The family talked about how, they wanted tougher charges, how the process wasn't as transparent, even, with their lawyer not really explaining the process. I did the best that I could. And I told them, just be patient. Sometimes they reduce charges because, if they go after them for higher charges, there's a possibility that they can get off. So they're really going to, charge them with something that they know they can get a guilty charge on. And with that, 25 years, he's this age, at 25, he's in there for the rest of his life. So really, consoling them during that process. The whole, judicial process is ridiculous, especially when you have an open case. If you're in Milwaukee County or if you're in the House of Correction, I know it has a new name now, but dealing with public defenders, there's really no education on how the process works. Being transparent again, I remember I was fighting a case. This was back in 2015. I did a year almost in a House of Correction fighting a case for a case that would have been thrown out if I was ever able to get in front of my judge. Because my lawyer, every time I was taken down to the courthouse, he would never come and see me or talk to me. I had to learn the process myself. I had to go and file a motion for a speedy trial. So I know now, at least in these 90 days, I'm finna get released. And that's all it took. But I had to sit a whole nother 6 months trying to learn and fight through that process. This is something that the county really fights hard for. David Muhammad, Regina, they really fight for youth justice and understanding that process and getting them some support. That's something that's really not looked at. It's a lot of times where individuals will take a guilty plea just to get out. They came at me with that multiple times. Like, hey, you can get out today if you just plead guilty. We'll lower this charge. I'm not guilty. I'm not pleading guilty to none. I'll sit. But, because I had the resilience to sit, that was a felony that didn't get on my name. Or else I could have just got out and did that felony. But so many of our black and brown people get into the system, don't have the support that's needed, and they're pleading guilty to charges that they're really not guilty for. So I think we really need to, support those that's fighting for justice reform.
Yeah, thank you, Quinn. So very, very grateful to have all of you here. I was going to ask a couple more questions, but we ran out of time. I think if you guys would step in the hallway, a lot of people might have more questions for you. I think one of the things that I noticed from many of your responses is that you guys don't work in silos, you work together, right? This is, and it's a great thing. Even if you're from the city, you're from the county, you're from a hospital-based or, Children's Hospital or Freighter and the medical college, you're all connecting and talking to each other, and it just creates a whole another level of support for the community and what you're doing. So we are very grateful for everything that you've done and will continue to do. Let's give them another round of applause. All right. Let's not even take a break. Let's get Father Kelly to come up. You students can stay up here. Students, young adults. You guys are like graduated from high school. Smart, intelligent. Sting? Okay, thank you. All right, I know everyone's trying to, it's Friday, it's 3 o'clock. For you diehards who are hanging around. Just gonna have some reflections on the day. I mean, there's been a lot of energy out in the hallway. We've heard from so many brilliant minds on the intersection of restorative justice and healthcare and street outreach. People in the hallway were telling me some about the film that struck them, you know, and they'll never forget this piece of the film or what somebody said up here on a panel. Any burning questions left that maybe these individuals can answer for you, and or we have some of the panelists over here who stayed throughout the entire conference. Thank you. Over here as well. We got one in the back. Go ahead.
Given we're at a Catholic institution, for those of you who are people of faith, where do you see God moving in this work?
Sure, pick on the priest. I think if we take religion and set it aside for a moment and look at spirituality, that God is in all of this and that we are better together, that we are all, and this is not just humanity, but it's creation as well, treating each other as the creation of God. I just think that's so much a part of what we're trying to do. That respect that we have for some, but not for others, the human dignity that we paint some with, but not others, that's the difficulty. The other thing I would say is, you know, for me at least, a little priest-like, God, there is no other for God. They're all inclusive. And only when we get into some of our religious kind of jargon do we start to separate out the worthy and the unworthy. And I think for God, for me at least, it's about inclusion. I'll stop with this piece. As a Christian, Jesus never excluded anybody. In fact, he included everybody, and ultimately it's what got him killed.
You all don't have to answer that. Other questions? Comments, not questions, just comments.
Hello. I think one of my questions is, after taking everything that I gather here, I still got to go down the street to the gas station. And when I go into the gas station, there's going to be somebody in the gas station with a military gun. I had to stand behind him or go past him in order to get some gas. I still going to have to stand behind somebody who's going to have a carry concealed, and his gun is going to be out. With that being said, I had to be in survival consistently. But then I had to look at the kids who were in survival. I have a 4-year-old child who I take in the gas station with me. He's in love with Fortnite. I have no idea what Fortnite. Don't play video games. But he constantly said, "Oh, Daddy, he died. Daddy, he dead." I had to, and I'm co-parent, so I had to realize that I'm co-parent with another person who has their own parenting skills too, that I had to coexist with. On the flip side is that I had to teach my son every day that I get. Every time I get him, I have to teach him over a period of time that he's loved, that this is different. With that being said is that if I'm in survival and kids learn more what they see, how do I get out of that survival mode and walk in the gas station and feel safe? As we say, we want to feel safe wherever the hell we go. There are certain moments where somebody mentioned that I have my son or you got your kid that I can't be safe, so I had to be in survival mode. my thing is, when we leave from here, how do I go and take everything I gather from here and still go out into the community and not be in survival mode, still be willing to help, but also look at the positive of individuals that's out here? Because if we talking about the youth, if I'm in survival mode, I know the youth are in survival mode too. And I know they see this as a part of their wardrobe. I got a nephew who wear guns and it's a part of his wardrobe. He got to have it out. How do we change that? And what does that look like in our future?
I can speak on something. So when we decided to do this conference and we met with our little Andrew Center group, I think we pretty quickly zeroed in on the fact that we wanted to talk about gun violence. And I can tell you from the day that we decided that, every day since then, there's been something on the news about somebody being shot or people being shot and killed. Not across the world, but in Milwaukee. And so when we were sitting in our little conference group trying to figure out who's going to speak and what are we going to do, one word came up, besides all the violence that we were seeing and hearing on the news, and that was hope, right? And we knew that we needed to structure this conference with that in mind. And we started learning about, right, hospital-based violence interruption, credible messengers, 411 for Life. And I knew they were out there, right, because I tangentially talked and worked with some of the groups here in other projects. But to bring them all together in one place here, to have this conversation, to bring our young kids, to bring even the guys from Racine Correctional in, really, I think, gave me some hope that there are people working on this, right? This topic, this issue, and that it became really, I felt some level of relief, but I can't answer that question for you short of the energy built in this room and knowing that these people are working so hard, and I know you are too, on this issue is really important. It felt like there's hope in some ways. That's the way I would answer that. Anybody other thoughts? Terry?
I think two things come to mind with what you brought up. One is, you know, you're talking about modeling as a parent, right? And modeling for your child how to handle the day-to-day stress. And I think part of that modeling, I think some of the best evidence would suggest that when you have moments where you feel comfortable and safe, modeling meditation, mindfulness, prayer, you know, all of that, because that is an opportunity to build skills that help regulate emotions and regulate the stress response. Because we know all of the buildup of that has significant long-term physical and mental health consequences. And so in that moment when you walk into the gas station and you see the firearm, maybe that is a cue that when you and your son get home, let's sit down and pray, or let's sit down and meditate, or let's sit down and do some belly breathing, you know, whatever you want to do to show that, like, yes, sometimes stress comes out of the blue and it's hard to regulate in the moment, but we can have control over it when we're intentionally trying to. So I think that's the first thing that came to mind. And then the second thing is, you know, as a preventionist, as an injury prevention person, you know, we just get rid of guns and then everything will be fine. But if we can't do that, then I think in a society where currently we have firearms, we have the most firearms in the entire world. It is a purely American problem. We need to then think about how can we have our children be safe around them. And so having conversations about what does safe handling look like, having conversations about even with family and friends who might have firearms in their home and your child may be over there. Okay, tell me about how you safely store those firearms so I know my son is safe when he's over there. Those kinds of conversations I think we need to have more often. Thank you, bye.
Sure.
Um,
I want to thank you because you are making a difference. And there is no age limit on communication. Don't forget that what you're doing and what you're saying and going out and doing it absolutely matters to many people. One of the things my dad taught me was learn what you don't want in your life so you can understand what you need, and you're doing it. And I wanted to just say thank you.
Okay, so what, and this is kind of for everybody, if you could digest down to like one or two thoughts, what would you like us to take home? What would you like us to take back to our communities as a result of this conference?
I feel as though this event has been a way of giving some sort or some ounce of, okay, young people and people within my community are doing something to solve problems within my community. And I feel like that should give us a bit of a softer mind or softer thoughts, knowing that, okay, there are things that are going on within my community, and they may be very bad. People could be hurting mentally, physically, in so many ways, but I know that there are people that are doing the work to try and help that. And that gives me hope, that there is some ounce of life within humanity.
I just want to say it takes a village. That's one thing that I use every day. It takes a village. It's not just going to be one person out there that's just going to do all the work. It takes all of you out here. It takes you to share this work that you're learning today, or you're taking what you already know, you're sharing it with the younger generation. It's not going to just stop all in one day, all of the violence, all of the hurt. It just takes all of us to help each other. We have to speak to each other. We have to listen to each other. Use what you know and share it. That's everybody's superpower.
Listen to the young people.
I think one of the things that restorative justice is really the way we want to do things, if we thought we could do things like that. And I think it's to really interrupt this is just the way we do it, with infusing a restorative, a relational kind of approach. I was really taken by the doctor who said when somebody gets on the operating table, that the first thing to do is a humanity touch and a talk. And that's very powerful. It's so simple, but it's very powerful. It's what you would do naturally if that person was someone you deeply knew. You would assure them that everything's going to be, we're going to make it as good as possible. I think that's its power. We can do that in anywhere, from a board meeting to whatever kind of meeting is. Just take a moment and see how people are doing in that space.
Oh, they took yours? Joanna. Thank you, Becca. You're getting more steps than I am today. I'm jealous.
Again, thank you, everyone. It just feels so good to be in this space, right? A restorative space. But to add on to what the youth are saying, and I've been in education for 29 years with high school students, and I'll take it a bit further and say, we don't just have to listen to kids, we have to give them power. Voice can be ignored. As an educator, hello, this is what I've been saying my whole life. People are like, we want to hear what teachers think. Well, but my voice can be ignored, and it is ignored. And that is also what I would say for kids. We want power, right? That we want to be heard, but we also want power to go with that. And that's changing how decision-making works in our institutions. That's looking at differently whose needs, who gets to identify needs, all that stuff. But we'll listen and couple that with power with, side by side, not two or four.
Can I just add? I think collaboration is really huge, and also thinking about this as a way of being. And so it's cultivated over time. It's a practice, and that's the reason it's called a practice. From the inside out.
All right, I'm cutting this off. We're going home. All right. I want to thank everyone for coming. This was just a joy to put on this conference for everybody. The amazing guest speakers that we had. Thank you, Father Kelly, for coming up from the south side of Chicago to Milwaukee. But thank you, everybody, our students, our young adults. I appreciate you. And never mind. Someone did that on purpose. We hope to have this on our website, the whole yesterday and today, and likely the film. We're still working on that piece, but so that you can enjoy bits and pieces of this at your leisure. But again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.